Hey everyone, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy the audiobooks, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to support us further, consider becoming a Patreon member. As a member, you'll gain the ability to request the next part of a novel audiobook I've uploaded, depending on your Patreon tier.
Hao Ren, being true to his name, was a good man. Living in an unimportant town north outside of Beijing, his house was so far off that it could hardly be counted as a part of the capital city. He was 20-something, a little macho with a big square face, the type of common face that would not leave a very strong impression on those that passed him by. His ultimate goal in life was to be a good man. Summer had just begun. The sun during the day was so scorching hot that even the town's high altitude didn't help to ease the unbearable heat. There was little wonder that only a handful of pedestrians were seen traversing on the walkways along the streets that were packed with moving vehicles. Hao Ren, in his gray pants and white t-shirt, was walking down the street under the shades of the trees and buildings with a few pieces of paper in his hands. He was sweating profusely. The annoying horn blares from the passing vehicles and the high-pitched buzz of the cicadas on the trees on that summer's morning did not help either. Despite the unforgiving situation, he kept moving and glanced occasionally at the papers in his hand, 2 sheets on job advertisements and a flyer which he picked up from a school girl in the square. Printed on the flyer were photos of a sweet smiling girl with a row of words underneath, reading, Jing Rong Obstetric and Gynecology Specialist Hospital, specializing in. He felt that it was unprofessional for the school girl who passed him the flyer. He wouldn't have passed out flyer to anyone seemingly penniless like him. That being said, the hard paper flyer did make an excellent paper fan. Last 2 interviews. If these still don't work out, I'll call it a day. Hao Ren mumbled with the job flyers still in his hands. He figured he could complete those 2 missions relatively quickly as the 2 locations were just around the corner. One of them was just a stone's throw away across the street. It was an advertising agency with an unassuming, same meaning with facade, but its name was in the face, Galaxy Media Pan-Cultural Development Company. Any business with such a name was destined to fail in half a year. But what motivated Hao Ren was not the job interview itself but the curiosity to find out what kind of a person the owner who came out with such a grandiloquent name was. He strode a few hundred meters down the pedestrian walkway with full enthusiasm. Enduring the scorching sun, he maneuvered around the road barrier and came up to the front of the grandiloquently named advertising agency only to find that it was shuttered. A notice pasted on the glass door entrance indicating that the agency had closed down 2 days ago. But the job advertisement was dated only 4 days ago. What a dramatic change. Was the agency looking for some kind of scapegoat before it went under? Hao Ren crumpled the job flyer in his hand before discarding it into the refuse bin on the side of the walkway. He lowered his gaze and looked at the second job flyer before binning in the same refuse bin. He couldn't wrap his head around the fact that he had gone for job interviews that were totally at odds with who he was, an office job in a public transport company, someone who has to be hardworking, possessing computer knowledge and working experience and has to be a lady of 25 to 40 years old. There was nothing sillier than coming all the way to town for a job interview only to find himself standing in front of a company that had closed down 2 days ago. Hao Ren, 25 years of age, was a man with no noteworthy bad habits, not particularly choosy about what to eat, still a bachelor who had a few friends or relatives, living alone in a house he inherited from his parents in the old section south of town. He was a typical youngster of those days, aiming for a 5-figure income at the age of 25, marrying a pretty wife and owning a car, if that was at all possible. He did not have the chance to show his filial piety as his parents were dead. But by living decently, he at least salvaged his family's name and had achieved 1/3 of his goals. His life was a sad story. He came looking for a job in town. But there was nothing necessitating him to do so as he owned an old house passed down by his parents. It was a 2-story building that had been converted into an apartment. For years, Hao Ren was living off the rental of the apartment. It had enabled him to live somewhat comfortably. It didn't make him rich. The apartment was in the middle of nowhere and it seems unlikely that the government will resume the local development in the near foreseeable future. Frankly, there was not, in the slightest, the need for Hao Ren to find a job for the time being. But perhaps he was in his comfort zone for far too long. He felt he needed some challenges and exploration. Besides, there was another important reason. His apartment was in a far-flung corner of the countryside where it was literally cut off from any civilization. Since the last farmer couples moved out half a year ago, the apartment had not harbored any new tenant. There was an uneasiness which he found hard to ignore. Unless development was forthcoming, it would not be long before he had to look for a job. After spending 3 days at home immersing himself in doing some urban planning research, Hao Ren came to the inevitable conclusion that the probability of his area being turned into a commercial zone was slim, not in a month of Sundays. Which meant, he had to plan ahead and begin to find a job. He used to work part-time to pay for college, so he figured it wouldn't be at all that difficult to going out there and getting a job wasn't at all that difficult. But fate played cruel tricks on him, leaving him empty-handed on the first day. He stretched and decided to call it a day. He found a bench under a tree in a park nearby where he could wait out the sweltering afternoon before heading to a restaurant to grab a bite and go home. Amid the sprawling developments going on around the town, it still preserved a little oasis as such for people to find some serenity. He wiped the bench clean before lying lazily on his back for a nap. He covered his face with the flyer from the pretty girl to block out the sun rays leaking through the leaves overhead. Of course he was still alert as incidents of pickpocketing were on the rise. It didn't matter the fact that he was penniless, being pickpocketed was the last thing he needed, all he wanted was just to take a brief nap to refresh himself. Before he could doze off, he sensed a shadow over him, it could be someone right beside him. He removed the flyer from his face and was shocked to find that the sun had almost set. And there, a person was standing right next to him at just the right angle to cast a shadow over him. He could barely see the person's face. But judging from the slender body and facial contour, he could tell it was a girl with short hair. "Hey, are you awake?" As the girl spoke, she kept waving to him as if they knew each other. Hao Ren bounced up and feeling a little drowsy, he did a reality check by examining his surroundings to make sure he wasn't dreaming, it was indeed sunset. He then looked up to the girl in front. The girl realized she was in the backlight, so she moved a little to the side so that she could be seen more clearly. Hao Ren got a first proper look at the girl and his first impression of the girl was that she was as beautiful as a goddess. The girl was simply dressed, a white slim-fit top with a childish puppy ornament on the collar matched with a dark color shorts and a pair of casual shoes, very much like a college student who was skipping classes. Her hair was shoulder length and her skin was wheat, a typical sporty and sunshine girl. She was pretty, especially her lustrous eyes, which were the most beautiful Hao Ren had ever seen. Behind her was a huge luggage. She looked at Hao Ren, who appeared a little loopy. She smiled like a Cheshire cat. Maybe the description was a little far off, but that was what Hao Ren thought of her. These days it is hard to find that kind of innocent smile among girls of her age. She tucked her hand inside her little bag, purportedly searching for something. It took her a while before she found a crumpled piece of paper and handed it to him. "Could you please tell me where this place is?" she asked. Hao Ren patted himself on the face, attempting to rid himself of the grogginess. He took a look at the flyer and saw the address written on the paper. "Wah! Isn't that my house?" Looking at the address, Hao Ren was stupefied. The all-too-familiar address was none other than his home. "Why is it that you are looking for this place?" Hao Ren had no idea as to why the stranger was having his address. He was a little flurried because of her, but was also pretty sure that he would never get lucky with women, except that time during his primary year 3 when he was seated next to a female classmate. He stared at her, feeling a little perplexed. He began to size her up. She had a pretty face and a slender body to complement it. Though her height was quite a letdown, her cheerful personality pretty much made up for that. "I'm looking for a place to stay," said the girl. "I have been searching high and low for it the entire day. Despite that, no one could tell me where it is." Hao Ren felt the girl was overwhelmingly amiable, but there was one particular thing that caught his attention. "I'm looking for a place to stay." He finally came out of his drowsiness. "Oh, I almost forget that I am a landlord myself. The classified ad for my apartment I placed in a local newspaper 2 days ago. Was that the reason this girl is here?" It appeared that he finally found his tenant. Hao Ren folded the paper and gave it back to the girl. "Of course I know where it is." "Follow me," he said. The girl was elated. She shoved the paper back into her bag and said, "Thank you so much. It has been a long day." Hao Ren got up and did a little stretch. Just as he was about to leave, he sensed something was off. "Wait a minute. Did you just say that you were looking for this address in town the whole day?" "Yep, I was. It was a pretty hard to find place," she said candidly as she nodded her head. "No wonder." Hao Ren thought she was either fooling around or just plainly dumb. "Can't you see the address, southern suburb?" And yet you were here looking in the downtown area. But it also clearly states, white stone building, there, said the girl as she was pointing to the direction of the downtown. Isn't white stone building in the town? Hao Ren knew immediately what she meant. He was dumbfounded. No. It's not white stone building but white stone road. As he was about to point out that she did not read the address properly, she overlooked the word road after white stone and assumed it was building. Ah. She quickly realized her mistake. My bad. I am always a little absent-minded. So do you know where White Stone Road is? Get me there. Hao Ren sensed that something was amiss about the girl. But being a landlord for the last couple of years, he had gotten used to being apathetic to his tenants, so he did not give it another thought. He pointed to the park entrance. We need to take the bus. Our destination is in the southern suburbs, so it would be nightfall by the time we get there. Oh, and by the way, about the address, it's actually my house. I am your landlord. The girl was startled. She looked at him wide-eyed. Ah, is that so? Before Hao Ren could nod his head, the girl was jumping with joy. Ah. What a coincidence. Could it be destiny? Hao Ren had felt that the girl was tripping over words from the moment they met. He could no longer mince his words. What if I am bad guy? Aren't you afraid of being kidnapped? That was his best effort to politely tell her that she was naive, really naive. How could she trust a stranger and follow him to the middle of nowhere? Girls nowadays had no sense of danger whatsoever. It must have been a miracle that she had not fallen into the hands of human traffickers all these years. As he was thinking of that, the simple girl, quite appropriately, looked at him suspiciously. Human trafficker. Are you going to kidnap me? Of course not, but he felt he should now keep a distance from her. If not for sake of the rent, he wouldn't have talked to her for so long. She was relieved. Okay then. Let's go. Hao Ren sighed. As he was about to leave the park, he felt his steps became heavy all of a sudden. They boarded a bus from the downtown which was heading for the countryside. It was an ear-bending journey. Hao Ren had discovered that not only was this new tenant amiable, tripping over words and naive, but also extremely chatty. She was too enthusiastic, babbling on about everything from B-list celebrity gossip, domestic or foreign, to house prices in second-tier cities. Hao Ren could not recall when she started rambling, nor did he know when she would stop. The girl would just ramble on as long as he nodded his head, occasionally pretending as if he was listening. That was not a problem for him, as he took it as an opportunity to learn more about his new tenant, to gauge her character. The naive girl was Lily Lu. She told Hao Ren to call her by her first name, Lily. She claimed to be a wanderer, veterinarian, and a casual prose writer, though she was not really sure what a prose writer's job was, who had just arrived from another city and planned to settle down here. Also, she did not mind what kind of a place she will be staying in as long as there was a roof over her head. Her works were quite flexible anyway. Based on the information, Hao Ren concluded that his new tenant was spirited, had no stable job currently but would not give him any trouble. He was happy with it. In fact, such a little girl would not cause much trouble at all. Although she seemed a little naive, but that was also her personal problem. He just had to play his part as the landlord, he thought. Just as he predicted, the sun had set by the time they arrived at the bus stop in the southern suburb. Hao Ren disembarked, with Lily following closely behind. Before Hao Ren could catch his breath, Lily yelled, "Is this White Stone Road?" It's southern suburb stop according to the road sign. White Stone Road is an old street. We have to walk through the alley to get there. Have you ever seen a bus traveling through an alley? Oops. Haha. Do excuse my ignorance, she tittered and continued maundering. It is quiet here. She frowned as she was examining the surrounding. The rickety bus stop was sitting on the shoulder of a disrepair road which was covered in potholes. The nearby buildings were old and rundown, with most of the shops closed. The 5-story apartments behind the shops were equally ramshackle. This desolate place was the downtown of the southern suburb. Sometimes, Hao Ren wondered whether this place was a castaway and forgotten by the modern society. But he would always remind and comfort himself at the end of every month that this place was not forgotten but very much remembered, by the water company, the electric utility, the gas supplier, and even the telephone and insurance companies. Hurry up, said Hao Ren, though this place is pretty safe, you don't want to bump into some drunkards at night. Let's head back to my place. And don't be wandering around outside at night. I am not about to get into trouble because of you. Just a reminder. By right, as a landlord, he shouldn't be that blunt lest the tenants were scared away. But Hao Ren was just trying to be frank. He despised dishonesty and took no advantage of others. This was the reason behind his failure to keep tenants sticking around his apartment lately, because prospective tenants were literally scared away. However, Lily was totally at ease. No worries, Mr. Landlord, I have learned a thing or two about fighting. Hao Ren felt as if he was talking to a weird fellow. I am not saying that. Let me make myself clear, aren't you afraid of nasty fellers? He had only met her for less than a day. He knew he should not be a busybody. But she was the weirdest girl, who was gullible and yet amiable to the point of being naive, he had ever met. So he was prepared to go the extra mile. Lily was unfeigned. Landlord, you are such a good man. But I am not afraid at all. I think I am strong enough. I had fought bad guys off on my own before. You surely have met bad guys before, but lowering your guard just because you have fought them off before is just. Hao Ren murmured. Lily did not respond. She looked at Hao Ren with a smile while lugging the massive suitcase behind her. Suddenly they heard two clunking noise. The luggage wheels had come off and rolled away. Ha ha ha, maybe the suitcase is too heavy. Lily scratched her head in embarrassment. No, it was the potholes. Hao Ren looked at the pothole-filled road and took a long sigh. As a man, he felt he needed play the gentleman. Let me take your luggage, I'm wondering what's in there. He grabbed the luggage from Lily. But immediately he felt like he was hauling a concrete block. The suitcase was so heavy that he could barely lift it off the ground. Lily did not notice Hao Ren's weird expression. She chuckled as she lifted the suitcase with one hand onto her shoulder as if it was empty. Hao Ren was left slack-jawed as Lily carried the suitcase on her shoulder and went ahead. He froze as he couldn't believe what he just encountered. Then he heard Lily yelled at him to hurry up. She murmured, "That's okay. I am just born with strong arms. You do see such thing on TV shows sometimes." As Lily kept rambling on while Hao Ren's head was packed with unanswered questions, they veered off the main road into a pitch-dark alley. At the end of the alley was Whitestone Road where Hao Ren's house was situated. Along the alley were two street lamps, one already went out. The dilapidated old houses nearby amplified the spooky ambience. Hao Ren would have freaked out if not for the faint moonlight illuminating the road ahead, enhancing the visibility of the alley. He looked at Lily, who was following him closely. She appeared to be in a pleasant mood. It was a dark night, not a soul could be seen on the road, a foreign place, and stranger, any one of these factors would have caused one to be more cautious. But Lily was not at all nervous. Was she just oblivious, or was she really that capable of keeping herself safe? Flop, flop, flop. As Hao Ren was still worried for the girl, he heard the creepy sound of flapping wings right above them. He was startled. Immediately, he looked up and vaguely saw a shadow gliding across the night sky above the high walls of the alley. The shadow looked like a bat, but its size wasn't so. Whoa, what was that thing? Hao Ren shouted, trying to keep his composure as he did not want to lose face, especially in front of Lily. He turned around, expecting Lily to be as scared as a soaked monkey, but what he saw was a pair of ears like those of a wolf, popping up from her head. Hao Ren froze. As Lily walked past him, he rubbed his eyes trying to clear his vision. He took a second look at her, but she was completely normal. He was certain of what he just saw, a pair of triangular ears which were covered in beautiful silver hair. He was very certain of his eyesight and short-term memory, but he definitely couldn't explain what he had just seen. He slapped himself and muttered, "Maybe I was hallucinating. I am just too tired today." "Landlord, what did you just say?" Lily turned her head around, her big beautiful eyes were glowing in the dark. Hallucinating about what? She heard his murmur. Hao Ren was awed by her sharp hearing ability. With a flick of his hand, he dismissed it while saying, "It's nothing. I am all right. Let's hurry up so that we can settle in for the night." "Okay." Lily carried the massive suitcase on her shoulder and kept rambling, "Landlord, I'm starving. Is there any place close to your house where I can grab a bite? Or can I eat at your house? I will pay for it." "Hey, why are you walking behind me? Please lead the way, I am not familiar with the place." Hao Ren sped up and took the lead. Though Lily was loquacious and naive, Hao Ren was impressed by her forthrightness. "No problem, I'll be the host tonight. I am alone anyway." Just as he finished talking, the floop sound occurred again. Hao Ren's reflexes were faster this time. He looked up immediately and caught sight of the silhouette of a bat the size of an eagle swooping across the night sky. Naturally, it did not actually occur to him that it was a bat, but rather, a large bird foraging at night. Outside the town was a vast piece of wasteland. For there to be wild birds in the skies of the town was not something uncommon. Instead, he was more worried about Lily as he did not want her to get a bad first impression of his place, so he made up a story. "Don't worry. That might just be a wild bird from the nearby wasteland." Suddenly, Lily approached him, puffing. "Mr. Landlord, I have something I need to do here. I suggest you keep going. I'll catch up later." Hao Ren was perplexed. "No, I'm not going to leave you here. It is like a maze in this alley, even locals would get lost at times. Why are you standing so close?" As Hao Ren turned around, their eyes met. Lily was just inches from him, she stared straight at him. Hao Ren was taken aback and stepped back half a meter from her. "Look. I am a gentleman." He would turn abrasive when he was nervous. Hao Ren was not sure if it was an illusion. He noticed there was a sense of hurriedness in her. Lily looked up the night sky and sniffed. "Landlord, please go. I can catch up later as I can remember your smell. So stop being shilly-shallied." "I really have something on," pleaded Lily. "No." Hao Ren was agitated. He did not seem to be bothered by her "remember your smell" remark and replied with a straight face, "What if something happens to you? I just can't bear to leave you here alone. What is it with you being so secretive?" As mentioned before, Hao Ren was a good man. Despite the fact that she was strong, he felt that he had a duty to ensure her safety. Besides, he could not also think of any reason why a girl from another city had any business here at this time of night. Lily became even more nervous. She dropped her suitcase and continuously scanned her surroundings. On both sides of the alley were dilapidated three-story houses which were once a symbol of wealth for the local residents during the town's glorious days. As good times waned, they were left in disrepair with the walls of unequal height at both sides of the alley covered in thick moss. The sky was the only thing visible between the walls. Lily's eyes were busy monitoring the gaps between the walls while she sniffed as if searching for traces of smell in the air. Upon seeing this, Hao Ren realized something was amiss. Since moment ago, Lily had been reacting strangely to the creepy flapping sounds above. She might have discovered something, so he asked, "What's going on, Lily Liu?" "Call me Lily," she quipped and turned to Hao Ren. "Why are you still here?" "Didn't you hear what I said?" replied Hao Ren as he stuck close to Lily. His voice was calm but he was clenched his fists tightly. There was nothing unusual in the surroundings, but the atmosphere was creepy as he smelled a hint of blood in the air carried by the chilly wind. This smell was not supposed to be prevalent during this time of the year, when the wind blew in every direction. His legs started trembling. Hao Ren was brave, that was what he thought of himself, but he was visibly terrified by the events unfolding around him. He was clueless about what was happening. He had heard many creepy urban legends and ghost stories, including tales of innocent souls of the dead in the alley and haunting road junctions, but he had brushed them off as mere gossip. He dismissed his initial spontaneous reactions as being overly nervous and influenced by Lily's strange behaviors. But the air reeked of blood and it was only growing stronger and stronger, to the point where he could almost taste it in his mouth. He could not explain this phenomenologic. He suddenly recalled when Lily was hurriedly asking him to leave a moment ago. She was aware of her surroundings when things were still normal and was not as dumb as he thought her to be. She knew what was coming. Damn it. How on earth did I get dragged into this? Hao Ren carefully scanned his surroundings. His thoughts were bogged down because of the foul blood odor, and the creepy, frosty wind. "Mr. Landlord, I'm sorry for dragging you into this. The thing is likely to be after me," Lily said with a coarse voice. "You are a good man, better than everyone else I've ever met. I'll promise you this, I'll get you out of this alive. Come on, stop playing nice." Hao Ren scoffed at her while his teeth were chattering. When he turned around to face Lily, his jaw dropped. Hao Ren could not recognize the girl close by at all. She was extremely beautiful with her silver waist-length hair. Her eyes were out of this world, the retinas were gold in color and glowed in the dark. She had a pair of wolf-like ears protruding, flapping under the wind, and tilting in different directions listening to the surroundings. A silver tail could be seen emerging from behind, wagging under her clothes. She was a werewolf, or a Kemonomami one in today's popular culture. Hao Ren could not fathom why he found this amusing, but he knew that his life would never be the same again, if he could keep his life today. Hao Ren's eyes were fixed on the silver-haired girl. Her golden eyes gleamed in the dark and her long, silver hair blew in the wind. Her pointy ears especially attracted his attention. If it were not for her face, which was still the same, he would not have recognized her as the very same Lily Lu whom he had brought from town. It was her, he could tell from her face and attire. The wind, moon, his clothes, and even his breath felt chilly. Hao Ren felt like he was being frozen in place. The smell of the air reminded him of a slaughterhouse, but the chill kept him awake. He needed to be alert as he tried hard to clear his befuddled mind to make sense of all the crazy stuff that had transpired. He stopped chatting Lily up, the spooky atmosphere probably dampened his mood. It was either that or he was at a loss for words due to Lily's strange look. In any case, Hao Ren was awed by the beauty of Lily, who was now a werewolf. Yet, he was also worried about the possibility of her being aggressive. He could see the beastly nature in her eyes, which made him nervous. At the same time, he couldn't help but also relate Lily with some of the comical characters in ACG, anime, comic and games. The acrid smell of blood in the air became even more unbearable and black ice started to form on the road's surface. The once bright moon had turned a faint red. Hao Ren was shivering in the cold wind as he was only wearing a thin layer of clothes. Lily, however, did not seem to be affected. Tilting her ears, she stuck her nose out in the air and sniffed as though she was looking for something. The cunning bat is using the smell of blood as a camouflage. Mr. Landlord, please stay with me. These flying creatures are notoriously active at night. They always prey on the unsuspected. The voice of the transformed Lily sounded cold, but he took a little comfort in the fact that she was not aggressive. So, he plucked up his courage and asked, Lily, what's going on? I'm a werewolf. Lily's ears stood erect as she proudly proclaimed, all the while, I've been hiding my werewolf identity. This is the first time it's been seen by a human. Beware. Nothing good will come out whenever you see these flying creatures. Hao Ren's understanding of the world had been thrown upside down. Before he could utter another word, Lily shouted in a muffled voice, there it comes. A shadowy figure swooped down from the night sky. He could vaguely see its silhouette under the faint moonlight. It did not look like a bat but more like someone with a cloak on. He did not have time to analyze everything as things unfolded too quickly. Knowing that he was the prey, every muscle and nerve in his body contracted and burst into action. He moved aside swiftly, the attacker swooped past him and barely brushed his hair. Lily seized the opportunity as the black shadow was diving towards the ground. A sound akin to a sonic boom followed as her leg swept through the air, striking the enemy. It was straightforward but brutal. She quickly faded into a silver, shadowy figure as she engaged the black shadow in a hand-to-hand battle. Hao Ren could see the vortexes of air created by their quick movements. Not long after, the black shadow was bested, it then transformed into a bat and flitted to the air. Before Lily could deliver the final blow, the bat was already up in the air above the walls. She was furious. She started to howl and Hao Ren recognized the howling sound. It was the same sound he had heard countless of times during his childhood near the woods. It was the sound of a howling wolf. However, there was no time to be in awe as he was in deep shit, a life and death situation. The bat did not flee, instead, it circled in the air like a vulture. It seemed like it was laughing at the werewolf for not being able to fly, or rather, it was waiting for the right moment to pounce on its prey. Hao Ren knew that as long as the bat was still in the air, he was not safe. He worked out in his mind that although the werewolf girl was good in hand-to-hand combat, she could not fly or perform long-range attacks. Moreover, she was dim-witted. If the bat were to have attacked him again, she probably would not have been able to stop it or react in time to save him. The werewolf girl raised her thin lips and growled furiously while the hair on her pointy ears stood up. She threw her head back, pointed her nose in the moon's direction and let out a loud, piercing howl. Right at that same time, the bat dived at an incredible speed towards Lily. Hao Ren was starting to panic. The werewolf girl is putting herself in danger posing pointlessly like that. The timing especially is inappropriate. Hao Ren saw an object in Lily's hand, but before he could tell what it was, Lily had already hurled the object towards the bat. The bat was hit directly in its course before it could come close. The bat was yelped in pain. It quickly turned around and fled up into the air. Hao Ren could then see the object in Lily's hand, rectangular and red. It was a brick. "Come, if you dare," the werewolf girl shouted at the bat provocatively. "Don't think that I can't get you. Ever since I realized I was a werewolf, I've been waiting for the day I can beat the hell out of flying bastards like you. 5 years of shooting brick practice just for this moment." Hao Ren was stumped. Her trump card was only brick throwing. Seriously? The bat's movement was wobbly. Apparently, it was hit hard by Lily's shooting brick. The pungent smell of blood began to subside as the bat started to lose its magic power. The standoff continued on for a few minutes, during which Lily reloaded her ammunition by picking up another brick on the ground. The bat realized it was not going to be able to take advantage of her. It circled in the air once more and flew away into the darkness. However, Lily was not quite ready to let the bat go just yet. She raised her arms and hurled the remaining bricks towards the fleeing bat. Hao Ren could not see the projectiles, but the bat was visibly alarmed as it fled the scene. At least one of the bricks could have hit its target. Yet Hao Ren was worried about something else. He was concerned about where the bricks would land. The projectiles were traveling at speeds no slower than a bullet. He could only pray that no one was in the vicinity of the desolate town as the bricks were landing. The attacker was finally gone and the surroundings were tranquil again. There was no more trace of blood in the air. Hao Ren rubbed his nose and sneezed as he was sensitive to the sudden changes in the air temperature. The chilly air slowly subsided and was displaced by the summer heat wave. He looked up. Lily was slowly transforming back to human form, slow enough that he could observe the transformation process itself. Her waist-length, silver hair turned black and retracted to shoulder length while the pointy wolf ears disappeared from her head. He smacked his lips and was at a loss for words due to what he had witnessed. Lily sensed the awkwardness, but she had expected it. She smiled at Hao Ren awkwardly and proceeded to carry the oversized suitcase on her shoulder. As she was about to leave, she turned around and said, "Oh yeah. Landlord, I've decided not to rent your apartment. And please, don't tell anyone about the things that happened today or else I'll be in trouble." Then, she left. "Wait a second." Hao Ren called out to Lily after abruptly recovering from his daze. "Where could you possibly go in the middle of the night? You can come to my place and stay for the night." Lily was startled for a moment before she turned around. Her big eyes gleamed with doubts and she said, "Why? Ain't you afraid that the flying creature will return?" "It's most probably after me. I'm a werewolf, its archenemy." "Not at all, because I'm a good person," Hao Ren replied whimsically. Hao Ren had a lot on his mind. The virtue of gratitude, revolutionaries who dedicated their life to their cause and the truth, his first, brave attempt to fight back against the bully who took his chocolate during his primary school years and whatnot. However, at that moment, there was only one thing he was interested in. That girl, Lily, was mystical, of something unusual. She was anything but human, yet she was not bad as she just saved his life. Hao Ren knew it. He was the primary target when the half-human, half-bat creature attacked him. He was just another ordinary man, but he took pride in his sharp instincts and his ability to remain calm in all kinds of situations thanks to his upbringing. He was known as a bad boy during his childhood and he laughed in the face of danger. This honed and sharpened his instincts as he grew up. Lily, on the other hand, did not notice this subtlety. It was probably because her mind was set. She thought that the bat was coming after her all along. It might also have been due to the fact that she was a little dumb. No matter what he thought of her as a person, the werewolf girl had indeed saved his life. Moreover, it was dark at night and she had nowhere to go. He couldn't leave her alone at that desolate place. He wouldn't. Of course, he was also being pragmatic. The bat could have returned at any time. So, he figured that it would be safer if Lily stuck with him. Her flaky shooting brick was a better weapon than his rolling pin in the kitchen at the very least. That might have been a little self-deprecating, but he was fully aware of his ability, or lack thereof. Lily was the best option. "Let's go, it's getting late." Hao Ren rubbed his legs as they were still numb from the chill earlier. He then went ahead of Lily. I will get you something to eat once we are home. Are you okay with a vegetarian meal? However, he immediately realized that it was a silly question. Lily was a werewolf. Anything is fine. Lily nodded happily as she carried her 100-pound suitcase, walking beside him. Aren't you scared? Have you seen the other kind before? I have seen it in movies. Those people are afraid of us. But fret not. I'm not going to hurt you. She was at it again, overly amiable, naive, dumb, and being too chatty. He had a headache. He couldn't answer her questions. He sighed and said to her, frankly, I'm still feeling a little dizzy right now. I need a nicotine fix to soothe my mind before I can answer your questions. Shall we talk about that later when we get home? Lily was unexpectedly compliant. She kept her mouth shut. They did not utter a word as they passed through the alley and arrived at Whitestone Road. Hao Ren's house was right at the end of the street with concrete pavement. Beyond that was an endless wasteland. The location of his house was one where civilization met the wilderness, a cool description Hao Ren had always used when referring to his dwelling to portray his young state of mind despite his age. On both sides of Whitestone Road were rows of motley, old residential buildings of 2 or even 3 stories. However, most of them were vacant. They felt haunted, especially at night. Developments had not come by and more people moved out than in. His apartment was one of the few which still had occupants in the sleepy town. It would feel spooky around here if not for the still functioning street lamps, Hao Ren mumbled. Huh. Spooky. Lily had sharp hearing, true to her Canid origin. Hao Ren waved his hand, gesturing that he was just talking nonsense. Lily did not give it much thought. She was staring at the house with satisfaction. This will make a good hideout. Quiet, deserted. You know, it's tough to live within the human society. You have to constantly worry about being exposed and sent for biopsies. Not only that, the human world has too many conmen. It's tiring. Would you look at that? A fearsome werewolf is afraid of a biopsy blade, quipped Hao Ren as he took out his keys to open the doors. He was amused by the analogy. Lily nodded aggressively. I saw it in the movies. The human species is inherently exclusive and resents other species. In America, extraterrestrials that are caught always end up on a biopsy table. Whereas in China, they always end up on a plate. It sounded like a load of crap to Hao Ren, so he decided to keep his mouth shut. The entrance had 2 layers of structure, a security door on the outside and a paneled door on the inside. The door's locks were decrepit and difficult to open. Hao Ren had spent a considerable effort to open them one by one before he was able to get in and switch on the hall lights to usher Lily in. Once they were inside, Hao Ren locked the doors. He proceeded to show Lily around the house. My dad was the house's chief designer, he began to explain. His idea was actually quite novel, if you know what I mean. This is the living room. There are bedrooms on both sides, of which one is for you and the other is for me. The door on the north side of the living room is a passageway to the kitchen as well as the washroom. There are 4 bedrooms upstairs, but they are all vacant at the moment. Let me show you your bedroom. Do you have your own bedding? Well, most girls are quite particular about that. Anyway, the rooms are quite clean and tidy. I'm fine as long as there's a place to sleep. Lily was energetic as she tapped her suitcase and said, I don't have personal bedding set. It wouldn't fit in my suitcase. Hao Ren was impressed. He felt that Lily was not your typical girl, she was of the ebullient type. Lily hauled her heavy luggage into her room. She didn't ask for help. It could have been out of her own shyness or nervousness. She hastened him into the kitchen while repeating that she would pay for dinner. There was not much left in the kitchen. He took out some dried noodles and other ingredients from the refrigerator. He hummed his favorite song as he turned on the gas stove. After that night's episode, he needed a nicotine fix to clear his mind. He took out a cigarette and tapped it a couple of times before putting it in his mouth. However, he quickly realized the stupidity in his action. He turned off the gas stove lest it be the last cigarette he smoked. He heard Lily busily unpacking her suitcase and he wondered what kind of luggage she had. As he was cooking, he tried to reorganize his thoughts and make sense of everything that had happened. He was looking for a job but ended up napping in the park. Then he woke up with an amiable girl who presently had become his new tenant. He bumped into some bizarre creatures. The werewolf was one of them. he had a supernatural and near-death experience, all of which defied his understanding of the world. What could the half-human, half-bat creature be? Also, that scent of blood and chill. He figured that it could have been a legendary vampire, the archenemy of the werewolf. After all, the werewolf was already real. However, the werewolf he had encountered was anything but legendary. There was no green-eyed monster, there were no long fangs and none of the scary features. She was just sort of cute, dumb, and almost comical. The harder he tried to think, the more perplexed he became. He decided to leave his thoughts on the back burner. He figured it was wiser to ask the werewolf girl to explain herself. The noodles were ready. He served it in a bowl and brought it to the living room as Lily waited eagerly at the table. Her nostrils flared like a puppy as she smelled the delicious scent in the air. Hao Ren was amused. Lily grabbed a pair of chopsticks and started stuffing the food into her mouth. Suddenly, Hao Ren headed to the stairs and yelled, "Raleigh, it's dinner time." Lily was curious. An obscure black and white creature suddenly ran down from the stairs. As it approached Hao Ren's leg, it rubbed its head against his shoe. It was a black and white cat. Lily almost jumped out of her skin upon seeing the cat. She leaped out of her chair and fled to the back of a nearby sofa. Why on earth was a fearsome werewolf scared of a cat? This sudden turn of events left Hao Ren dumbstruck. Lily had already transformed into her werewolf form before scurrying behind the sofa. Kneeling behind the sofa, Lily cautiously peeked out, revealing half of her head. Her long, silver hair was cascading to the ground whilst her silver-white ears constantly twitched, seemingly being very much aware of her surroundings. She also seemed prepared for battle. Hao Ren felt that this mysterious being with half a strand of noodle and some vegetables in its mouth did not resemble anything majestic at all. Moreover, what Lily did next further convinced Hao Ren. She grabbed a pair of chopsticks while trembling and pointed to the black and white cat at his feet, and with a quavering voice, she cried, "Cat! Cat! Meow!" The black and white cat tilted its head, curious about the uninvited guest present in its home. This made Lily tremble. Being a cat, it completely disregarded Lily moments later, not bothering to even spare a glance towards her. Witnessing this, Hao Ren was dumbstruck. After some careful thought, he looked at Lily as if she was confronted by a mortal enemy and unbelievingly asked, "You are afraid of cats?" "I'm not afraid of cats," said Lily obstinately, as if she was a proud pit bull. "I was just being apprehensive." "It's the same thing," said Hao Ren, who was unable to comprehend why a werewolf would be afraid of a cat. Without caring that the other party was a werewolf, moreover a newly acquainted one, he shouted, for crying out loud. "You are a werewolf." "I am a werewolf." Lily finally was conscious that her actions were somewhat embarrassing. Also, irritated by Hao Ren's gaze and speech, she put up a brave front and came out from behind the sofa. Pretending to go back to the side of the dining table, Lily tiptoed around the living room wall to the other end of the living room. "Are you sure that this cat is safe?" "What's not safe about this cat?" Saying this, Hao Ren conveniently scooped up the black and white cat. "I've never met a cat that's so tame." "Do you agree with me, Raleigh 1?" Immediately, the black and white cat meowed softly, looking very tame. Upon seeing this, Hao Ren happily took the cat's feeding bowl, filled it to the brim, and placed it next to the dining table. This was the cat's usual feeding place. At the same time, Hao Ren pointed to Lily to introduce the cat to her and said, "This is Lily, and she's a werewolf. This might not be of any importance to you, but in any case, just know that she is a guest in our home. From now on, your food will depend on how much rent she can provide, so be nice to the one that pays for your food, okay?" As if it understood human language, the black and white cat raised its head and nodded at Lily, indicating its approval, before it continued eating. At this, Lily only felt that the cat was harmless. She carefully trotted back to the dining table, with the bowl of noodles in her hands, choosing a safe spot which was furthest away from the cat. Suddenly, as if she recalled something, she inquired, "What did you call the cat just now?" "Raleigh." Hao Ren looked down to his only family member. "His name is Raleigh." Lily's silver hair and wolf ears slowly retracted as she calmed down. In all honesty, Hao Ren was still feeling quite guilty. With a look of amazement on Lily's face, she asked, "Why does it have such a weird name?" "This cat came to my house last year," Hao Ren answered with a chuckle, elaborating on the background of his cat. I had no idea what breed it was. This is a remote place, with many wild cats and dogs, and to have one or two entering your house unnoticed is pretty common. But somehow, this cat did not leave after it came. I've tried driving it out away a few times but to no avail. So you name it Raleigh? Hoping that it will roll two away. Lily asked with glaring eyes. No, it likes to jump onto the bed when I'm watching TV, and I used to shout "roll off" to shoo it away. It was effective at first, but as time passed by, whenever I shout "roll off," it'll come towards me instead. This cat thinks that its name is Roll Off, so its name is really Raleigh now. After hearing this, Lily ate her food silently and moments later said, "Feels like this is a weird place." Hao Ren rolled his eyes, thinking, "There's nothing in this house that's weirder than you." This werewolf had her common sense turned upside down. It was already 9 in the evening after they finished their meal. It was Raleigh's time of the day to be active. It ran to the first floor to patrol its territory. On the other hand, Hao Ren left his cutleries in the kitchen sink, letting them soak overnight so that he can wash them the following day. After that, he lit a cigarette, sat in the living room, and stared blankly into space, continuing to sort out the day's events in his mind, and sighed as he felt that he had great difficulty in accepting what had happened. Also full of energy, the werewolf was running up and down the stairs, trying to familiarize with her new home. Lily sniffed around every new place she passed, as if trying to memorize all the scents. Although Lily was in her human form now, Hao Ren could help but imagine that she still had pointy ears and a swishy tail. In normal circumstances, Hao Ren would have shared what was in his mind when a guest was being too comfortable in his home. However, with Lily, he had nothing left to say. He thought to himself, it is normal for wolves to mark their territories. Now, I just hope that this particular wolf is aware that this is not her home and that she's just a tenant. Considering Lily's current actions, this would not be a problem. Anyway, no matter what the circumstances were, Hao Ren was sure that he was not a worthy opponent for the werewolf. Was it a mistake to invite a non-human with such high fighting capacity into his home in such a manner? After regaining his composure, Hao Ren couldn't help but think it through. But after much consideration, he felt that he made the right choice and in fact, looked forward to seeing how things would develop in the future. This was actually him asking for trouble, as a normal person should learn to avoid danger, and not approach a mysterious being that was capable of taking his life, out of curiosity. However, Hao Ren was tired of his mundane daily life. He loved reading novels, watching television, as well as reading different weird sci-fi stories. This was the monotonous and empty state of life that every single adolescent who did not have to worry about money would choose to live in. Hao Ren was not that childish and was still not that sick of his meaningless life. His first reaction when faced with random pop-ups online would be to close them. But this did not seem to dampen Hao Ren's curiosity when faced with new excitements. This was due to the psychology of seeking novelty. Once the psychology of seeking novelty is satisfied, some would have stepped back, whilst some would have reacted the same way as Hao Ren. No matter what, he needed to be aware of the weird but dangerous bat. Although unclear on why he was a target for the bat, Hao Ren accepted this fact. He was not the kind who ran away from reality but would keenly search for ways to increase his chances of survival. For example, taking in a werewolf who seemingly possessed such high fighting capabilities yet was still quite friendly and negotiable. Landlord. Here is your rent. Lily was scurrying around the house. There were outcries whenever she bumped into Raleigh during this frenzy, and finally came to her senses about her current form. She happily trotted to the house to get her purse, calculated her rent and stuffed it into Hao Ren's hand, saying, "According to the advertisement you put up, this is 3 months' rent in advance. How much is the additional cost for food?" Apart from being negotiable, this was a werewolf who willingly paid her rent. No one could ever find this scenario in a book. Food will be free. Hao Ren realized Lily frowned as soon as she smelled the cigarette smoke, such keen sense of smell, and he consciously put out his cigarette. An extra mouth to feed will not cost much. Plus, don't keep calling me landlord, I have a name. Just call me Hao Ren. Okay, landlord. Call me Hao Ren. Yes, landlord. Forget about it. I'm going to bed, so make yourself at home. Do not simply enter the rooms that are locked, but other rooms should be fine. Hao Ren sighed and went into his room. As Lily was about to leave, a new topic came to her mind. "Oh landlord, you wouldn't attack me in the middle of the night, right? It's just you and me in this house, and it's my first time renting a room from a bachelor." Upon hearing this, Hao Ren nearly fell to the ground. He angrily turned around, stared at the werewolf and said, "For my own personal safety, I would never ever attack you at night. So there's nothing for you to worry about." How did it feel to have a werewolf living at home? There's not much to it. There was no werewolf transformation since it was not a night with a full moon, hence there were no bloodthirsty werewolf massacres, nor was there a squad of 200 knights led by a demon hunter charging into the house to exterminate a werewolf. Hao Ren felt that this night was peaceful since nothing had happened. The werewolf was affable, willingly pays rent, and was not ferocious even after transformation. The only thing remotely bothersome about her was her fear of cats, as well as being a slight bit long-winded. And of course, she was slightly annoying. Apart from these, she had no other shortcomings. Werewolf form or not, she was quite cute. The next dawn, Hao Ren woke up in shock when his face was slobbered. The first thing he noticed was a face of black and white, with two golden pupils staring straight into his eyes. This meant only one thing: breakfast. "Good morning, Raleigh." Hao Ren tried his best not to fall back to sleep. After a few yawns, his limbs seemed to awaken, and he waved his arms to chase the cat off. Still feeling groggy, he pulled himself out of bed to get dressed. Suddenly, he recalled that he had a guest in his house. Also, this new guest was a so-called werewolf. This fact was the cause for his insomnia last night. Awaking from slumber, he ruffled his hair and asked himself, was it all a dream? Very quickly, he realized that it was indeed not a dream. There were the sound of footsteps approaching from the direction of the living room, followed by a somewhat familiar voice, "Landlord. Why isn't there signal for the television?" It was stated in the ad that there was television. Hao Ren let out a sigh, finally accepting the fact that his life had indeed changed. He knew that he was not fully prepared, in all honesty, unless he was still naive with a brain was full of hallucinations, who could have been prepared for this kind of situation. He was completely clueless on how he would live under the same roof with a werewolf, and never knowing what could happen at any point in time. Looking at the current situation, he might as well catch the bull by its horns when the need arises. Exiting his bedroom, Hao Ren saw Lily sitting in the living room. This werewolf teenager had already changed into a tank top and denim shorts. Radiating youth and energy along with her wheat-colored skin and outfit, Lily looked like someone who had just completed an entire course of a fitness program. Noticing that Hao Ren had exited his room, Lily happily waved to him and said, "Good morning, landlord. Can you please check why the TV has no signal?" Right after she said that, she saw the black and white cat lying on Hao Ren's shoulder, and she immediately scurried to the back of the sofa. Timidly, she stuck half of her head out and stared at it with eyes which had turned pale, and in a stuttering voice said, "Raleigh. Good morning. As a werewolf, please live with some dignity." Hao Ren gave Lily a glance. He felt that his senses toward the dangers that lay undiscovered was slowly diminishing with each conversation he had with Lily. This sort of scenario is kind of distracting and relaxing, to be honest, Hao Ren thought to himself. He walked across the living room to the LED TV which he had purchased 2 to 3 years ago. The display was completely blue, and the incessant static noise was annoying. "Is something wrong with the TV? Can't you get any signal from your room?" This simple-looking rented apartment was in fact a lavish one. Each room had its own TV. This idea came to Hao Ren when business was good a couple of years ago. The televisions were on sale back then and allowing him to acquire them without spending a fortune. Today, possessing a TV in each room was a major selling point when it came to renting the rooms out. Lily nodded and carefully crawled out from behind the sofa on all fours. Treading slowly, she said, "There's no signal in the room. I need to watch some documentaries in the morning." "You like watching documentaries?" Hao Ren asked while checking the back of the TV to see if the problem stemmed from a loose cable. "No. It's just that there have been some films about wolves in the wild lately. I have to be aware of what my kind," answered Lily. "You're from South Africa?" Hao Ren turned his head, curious. Thinking that he was able to discuss such topics with a werewolf, he could not help but feel curious. Lily shook her head. "No. I do not know where I come from. I probably came from a snowy region. The memories I had before my slumber are blurry and I cannot recall anything, but I feel that no matter where a wolf comes from, we still belong to the same family." You humans classify yourselves by race and religion, but you're still humans on Earth. I feel that the reason why we mutants are segregated into the lowest class by humans are because we're not united. Lily rambled on and on. Hao Ren felt that he could no longer keep up with her topic. My goodness, how can someone keep up with this conversation? To talk about evolution or problems in each species with a canine from a snowy region. There seem to be no problems with the cable as well as the TV. Since you can't get any signal in your room, it is most probably due to the technical hiccups by the broadcast station, said Hao Ren in a professional manner. In fact, he could not identify the root cause of the problem. He said those words because he felt that he should not embarrass himself any further in front of a silly werewolf who was very much afraid of cats. Watching TV programs here is mostly dependent on the TV's signal instead of pre-recorded ones. Okay, answered Lily. There was a trace of disappointment in her face, but it was gone in a few seconds. Hao Ren filled Raleigh's food bowl and went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. However, there was a knock on the door before he even managed to reach the kitchen. Not knowing whether it was just his imagination, Hao Ren felt a familiar chill seconds before someone knocked on the door. However, this feeling was dissipated quickly, leading Hao Ren to think that it might be because he had been too stressed out lately. Lily frowned and scrunched her nose, but she did not pursue the matter. She pointed at the front door and said, "Landlord, you have guests." "Yes, I know." Hao Ren jogged to the door, wondering who it was that could have visited him in this god-forsaken place. Based on this person's time of arrival, it should most likely not be a hound from the electric or water suppliers. Whilst opening the door, he said, "Hi, who are you looking for?" A female stranger stood at his doorstep. She was lanky at around 1.7 meters tall, with hair that fell to her waist. She wore a plain black dress and a pair of worn-out sneakers. Although she had no accessories on, her dull attire could not mask her beauty. She looked to be of noble birth. She did not have large eyes, but when she smiled, they looked elegant. She had a small, hooked nose as well as thin lips. There was no makeup on her pretty face, yet her lips were a radiant red. Her features indicated that she was Eurasian, giving off the vibe that she blessed with the beauty of mixed heritage. The most eye-catching thing about her, however, was her flawless complexion. Her smooth and soft skin looked like it could tear from a gust of wind. Her skin was also exceptionally fair, which resulted in her looking slightly pale. Hao Ren was not a lecher. Although he frequently hooked up with girls, he was still able to restrain himself. Even after he saw a teenager as beautiful as Lily dancing and skipping around yesterday, he was only taken aback momentarily. The primary reason why he was so startled now was because the girl in front of him was really that much more astonishing. The stranger at the door had her arms raised, shielding herself from the sunlight, as if she disliked the intense sun. As soon as she saw Hao Ren opening the door, she lost her composure and blurted, "You were the one who, last night. You're not dead. How can you say such things?" Hao Ren immediately understood the context of her question and was alerted to her possible identity. "Yesterday night, my goodness. Lily, transform quickly." Apart from Lily, Hao Ren encountered only one other person last night. Moreover, he was now certain that the sudden chill he felt moments ago was not his imagination. That was actually his mysterious sixth sense which he developed since he was young, but it was proven that having the sixth sense alone was useless when one had let his guard down. He had already opened the door and his attacker from last night was just less than 2 meters away from him. The last thought that came to Hao Ren's mind in this chapter was, "I cannot believe that it was such a beautiful girl." Lily, transform quickly. It was the one and only solution Hao Ren could think of at that moment. The familiar aura of bloodlust and chillness re-emerged. He knew that he was no match for the human-like mutant in front of him. He was just a normal human being after all. However, even after shouting out for Lily, he did not have high hopes. He was less than 2 meters away from this girl. Hao Ren felt a gust of wind behind him and knew that it was Lily, who had transformed into a werewolf. She was coming to his rescue. At the same time, Hao Ren was prepared to leap aside to let the werewolf and what seemed like a vampire come face to face. It meant that he would be out of harm's way. Unfortunately, Hao Ren had either overestimated his reflexes or underestimated the opponent's fighting capacity. Just as the thought to dodge crossed his mind, the girl with long, straight hair had already stretched out her hand. She had reflexes which were beyond human. She grabbed Hao Ren by the arm and with great strength which could have possibly broken his arm, she flung Hao Ren behind her. With a melodious voice, she cried, "Be careful." Hao Ren was stunned when he was flung across. It seemed like the dangerous mutant in front of me just told me to be careful. Lily rushed to the door but she was slow by half a beat. Upon looking at her, Hao Ren was disappointed as the silly girl did not even transform yet or held any weapons. She was still in her cozy home attire. Her hair was not white and her ears were not out. She happily trotted to the door. "Landlord, oh landlord, here I come. Is it the deliveryman?" Deep down, Hao Ren was both sad and furious. He screamed to himself in disbelief. "Oh, this stupid girl. There is completely no tacit understanding between us at all." Lily's actions made Hao Ren completely give up on his attempts to escape from the vampire's grasp. Lily saw the black-haired stranger before her and came to her senses immediately. She transformed into a werewolf within a second and grabbed 2 bricks near the front door ready for battle, but even so, Hao Ren still felt it was hopeless. I should not have trusted this stupid werewolf from the start. Hanging a ring of garlic around my neck by myself would be even more reliable than Lily. Of course, he would find out later on that garlic was useless when it came to a certain vampire. Seeing that her landlord was taken by the enemy, Lily became upset. She grasped the bricks in her hand tightly and from her throat came a low growling voice, displaying her strength. "Vampire, it's daytime now. You're no match for me during the night, what more during the daytime? Let my landlord go and I'll spare your life." The vampire had no fear. Being in the middle of Hao Ren and Lily, her right arm was put up in a defensive stance. Her sharp nails grew longer and chilling sense of bloodlust surrounded her body. She quietly moved her left arm to her back and swayed her hands a couple of times in front of a baffled Hao Ren. It appeared like she was urging Hao Ren to leave at once. Werewolf, when did beasts start putting up an act and tried blending in within a human city? The vampire's voice was cold and disdainful. Although there was a sense of debility, her tone was beyond contempt. She was struck a couple of times by the werewolf using a brick. "Isn't your actual duty hunting rabbits in the wild?" "Humph." Lily answered furiously, "You stupid vampire, you must not have known that I am unable to catch rabbits." Upon hearing this, Hao Ren thought that he might as well be dead. Then he would not have to trouble the silly werewolf. She was such a stupid werewolf. Even the vampire who was normally calm could not help but be taken aback by the werewolf's reply, which did not make much sense. Nearly laughing out, she swayed her left hand towards Hao Ren again. Simultaneously, Hao Ren heard a voice in his ears, "Human, run first. I'll hold this werewolf back. It should be no problem for me to hold her back although it's daytime now." What? For once, Lily was smart enough to realize that the vampire was off guard. She immediately let out a deep growl and charged towards the vampire with the brick in her hand. She did not throw the brick at the vampire as she was worried that it might hit her landlord. "Die, you winged rat." The vampire fearlessly welcomed Lily, who was charging towards her. Waving her hands, a pale, blood-red streak coagulated midair. Her sharp fingernails grew to more than 10 centimeters in length and like a dagger, attempted to stab Lily's chest. "Go to hell. You beast, who only knows how to catch rabbits. You stupid vampire. I've already told you that I do not know how to catch rabbits. Don't hope that you can distract me using this method. You can't use the same trick twice on a vampire." While Hao Ren was still in a stunned state, both mutants were already locked in combat. Like a silver streak, Lily was going from left to right attempting to reach Hao Ren. Although it was daytime, the vampire was no less powerful than Lily. The vampire transformed into a black shadow, dancing around in a red streak with sharp claws. She was able to block every advance from the werewolf. It seemed like the howls from Lily and cries from the vampire came from multiple locations at once. Their movements could not be caught by human eyes and ears. As Hao Ren started to regain his senses, he realized that he had to stop the two from battling each other no matter what. It was not due to any particular reason. He was just worried that others might appear and witness the weird scene. Although it was a deserted place, there were still people living there. The inhabitants would have come out any time as it was already daylight. There would have been trouble if someone saw the commotion caused by Lily and the vampire. Lily could have been captured by the Science Academy, sliced and served in a canteen. Hao Ren was sure of the food junkie culture in China. Hao Ren was desperate when he noticed that someone was coming out of their house at the end of the alley. He shouted at the top of his voice, "Stop! That's enough!" His roar shook the ground. Hao Ren could already imagine his neighbors going around the next few days, asking whether he was a victim of domestic violence after hearing his scream. However, it was somehow effective. The storm formed by Lily and the vampire during the battle instantly stopped. They turned to Hao Ren with confused faces and immediately glowered at each other. Lily still looked high-spirited, as if she had just warmed up from the battle. On the other hand, the vampire looked a bit tired. She was breathing heavily and her face was unusually red. After all, it was not easy battling a werewolf in broad daylight. Nonetheless, they had something in common. They did not break a sweat even though they went through such a tough fight. The icy aura that radiated from the teenage vampire had a bone-chilling effect. "There might be some misunderstandings between the both of you," Hao Ren said, seeing the both of them glaring at one another. He knew that a fight could break out at any moment. He wedged himself between them, although he was leaning more towards Lily's side of course, and said, "Firstly, I have to confirm something. You, vampire, you actually have no intentions on killing me, right?" Hao Ren felt awkward as the words left his mouth. However, he had no time to think things through because he knew that there had to be a great misunderstanding between the werewolf and the vampire. Immediately, the vampire's eyes widened. She threw Lily a cautious glance whilst taking a glimpse of Hao Ren. "I want to save you." Before Hao Ren could open his mouth, Lily leapt out and said, "Who are you bluffing? You just want to suck on the landlord's blood. I've watched TV before and you vampires never have good intentions." Suddenly, Hao Ren realized something. Why did most of the werewolf's knowledge come from watching TV? Was it her first time meeting a vampire? "You were the one who kidnapped this human in the first place." The vampire narrowed her eyes, revealing a murderous look. "Kidnapping humans, forcing them to help you hide your identity so that you can integrate yourselves in the human city. You wolves aren't that bright. You've been using this tactic for decades yet there's still no change until now. No wonder you're on the brink of extinction." They continued to throw deadly stares at each other. However, they were starting to lose their stamina. After hearing bits and pieces of the conversation, a thought crossed Hao Ren's mind. "Sigh, what is all this about? Stop fighting first. Let's talk back at home." After making a hot pot of tea, Hao Ren went back to the living room. He looked at the two unusual creatures sitting there and staring at each other. A wary vampire and a furious Lily sat at opposite ends of the tea table, both ready to pick a fight at any moment. The atmosphere was cold and filled with raw energy as they threw deadly glances at each other. Hao Ren could almost see the greenish-gray cloud on the tea table revolving non-stop with his naked eye. Tea was served and both beautiful girls had no intention on setting aside their differences. During such an intense moment, Hao Ren could only shrug. It was the only way his fragile human body could cope with the immense pressure from both the werewolf and vampire. He was trying his best to figure out a way to make both of them believe what the other had to say. Lily firmly believed that the vampire had the intention of sucking her landlord's blood and everything the vampire said were just excuses for not being able to win the fight. She also wondered why the vampire was so self-confident. Apart from that, Lily was certain that Hao Ren was already under the vampire's spell and what came out of his mouth was nonsense. On the other hand, the vampire was adamant that Lily wanted to live undercover among the humans and everything Hao Ren said was due to the werewolf's intimidation. It was a deadlock. Both did not trust one another as well as the third party, who was Hao Ren. To make matters worse, there was no one else there. In actual fact, however, there was another party present. It was the black and white cat eating not far away. Oblivious to the chill in the room, the mysterious creature named Raleigh was protecting its bowl of food as if protecting its own life. Hao Ren was quite convinced that the naive cat was an oddball of its kind. "You." It was Hao Ren who finally broke the silence. He turned towards the vampire, where all the misunderstandings stemmed from. "Miss Vampire, this meant that last night." "Please do not address me using the word vampire," said the plainly clad but still elegant girl with long, black hair as she frowned slightly. "Vampires are only common slaves with an uncontrollable desire to suck on blood. We, the ones who can restrain ourselves from the lust of blood, are of royal blood in the Blood clan. There are deep misunderstandings that humans have towards us, hence the confusion. You can call me Vivian. I can't give you my full name for the time being. Oh. Hao Ren nodded. Hao Ren did not know the differences between a normal-blooded slave and a royal-blooded clan member. Even so, he knew that the girl with long, black hair in front of him was actually quite easygoing. Vivian. So, you're saying that you weren't attacking us last night? Instead, you were trying to help. I saw a human walking with a werewolf. I did not know whether you were being deceived or threatened, Vivian said as she nodded in agreement. I intended to snatch you away from the werewolf. No matter what spell she cast on you, it can easily be overcome as a werewolf's magic is amateur. However, I was not at my best yesterday since I was hurt by her concealed weapon. Beasts will be beasts. They will go to any lengths during battle. There is no aesthetics at all. You're being unreasonable, Lily snorted. Why find so many excuses? The fact is you just can't beat me. Tell me, how did I threaten landlord? He could have ran and jumped away any time. I was not holding his neck. The chill around Vivian grew stronger. Werewolves' claws are cursed. Do you think I am that stupid to not know such common knowledge? Upon hearing this, Lily immediately looked down at her own hands in astonishment, saying, Oh my goodness, am I that powerful? Hao Ren decided not to pay any attention to the two silly creatures. He turned to Vivian and with a sincere expression on his face said, Look, I was not threatened at all. I swear to God that Lily did not put me under her spell. Vivian nodded her head upon hearing Hao Ren's explanation. Just as Hao Ren was beginning to feel glad that the teenage girl from the Blood Clan had finally acknowledged the facts, Vivian's facial expression turned serious. She then said, Don't worry. I know that you're still not telling the truth. You're still bound to the werewolf's curse and unconfident in my ability. I'll show you once I've fully recovered. This wild canine, who only knows how to throw bricks, will be no match for a high-order member of the Blood Clan. Lily slammed her fist on the tea table after hearing this, leaving a big crack in the shape of a turtle shell on the table. Who are you calling a wild canine? You winged rat. Without suppressing her anger, Vivian also stood up. The tea table and sofa were covered in a layer of frost in a blink of an eye. You think you're that powerful? Let's have a rematch. It's because of folks like you who cannot control their instincts that made the world what it is today. The murderous tension, which was initially confined to the tea table, started to pervade the entire atmosphere. All the shouting followed by roaring which sent chills down one's spine as well as indistinctive howling finally alerted Raleigh to the situation. Raleigh quickly wolfed down a couple more mouthfuls of food and darted to the first floor. Hao Ren was left to stare at his own furniture. My tea table. How he was able to withstand the murderous tension was a mystery. Landlord, do not worry. I'll pay for the damage. Lily was a kind person at heart. After realizing her mistake, she pushed her boiling fury aside and immediately apologized to Hao Ren. Hao Ren managed to make sense of the whole situation. The werewolf was a silly one whereas the one from the Blood Clan was just insane. Although Vivian had a normal appearance, she was neither smarter nor saner than Lily. Would it have hurt to have someone who had both brains and brawn at the same time? As Lily and Vivian prepared to have another go at each other in the living room, Hao Ren finally lost his patience. He slammed his fist on the tea table and with an authoritative voice, he shouted, That's enough. This is my house. The yelling and fist slamming were actions rarely seen from someone who was good-natured and slow like Hao Ren. Both vampire and werewolf were finally aware that they were in someone's house. Moreover, one of them realized she owed the landlord money for the broken tea table. Thus, both halted and turned their eyes to Hao Ren. Why are the two of you looking at me? Hao Ren frightened himself when he yelled at the two mutants. He did not expect himself to have the audacity to shout at two magnificent creatures that could easily take his life, yet his roar alone managed to stop the two from fighting. In doing so, he felt a sense of maturity. Thus, he was brave enough to say, Look at yourselves. One is an idiot and the other is as stubborn as a mule. I am involved in this, okay? Can both of you not jump to conclusions and ignore what I have to say? And also, just think for a moment whether your actions suit your identity. When did werewolves and vampires start protecting humans with their lives? Let me, the person who's most confused about this situation, figure this out first. Then, we will sort out the misunderstandings between the both of you. Okay. The last question was actually on Hao Ren's mind the whole time. In a digitally advanced era where information can be easily exchanged, everyone knew the story between vampires and werewolves. One could easily find that at least 2 out of 10 science fiction movies involve these two creatures. Based on Hao Ren's perception, blood-hungry and irrational werewolves as well as sinister and grim vampires were both creatures as sharp as a tack. So, what was wrong with these two in front of him? Surprisingly, both Lily and Vivian shouted at the same, "I am different from that wild animal." Both looked at each other with an air of surprise and immediately looked away, each believing themselves to be telling the truth. I have no idea about the others who pick fights with the humans as though they can't survive without doing so. As far as I am aware of, I have been mingling with humans since, forever, Vivian said whilst hugging herself. Also, I inherently hate others of the blood clan. Don't ask me why. I have no idea myself. I've been like this since I was young and I'm not used to seeing other mutants fighting humans. They're just too stupid. So that's that. I've never met other mutants. Lily sniffed the air like she was not fond of Vivian's scent. I woke up in a freezing place. Might have been a snowy region. I was in human form when I woke up. I was brought up by an old lady and I also lived with humans for several decades after that. I'll only move when they start having doubts about me not aging. I like humans and I am used to them. Is there a problem with this? Hao Ren surveyed the two unusual creatures and decided to believe them. Well, whether he believed them or not, there was actually no difference. He was still no match for either one. Frosty air and low pressure still lingered in the living room, but fortunately, the two culprits seemed to have given up on the idea of starting a fight. Hao Ren sighed and started to pick up the frozen blocks of teacups. They also cracked due to the freezing temperatures. He looked at the tea table, which was destroyed, and thought to himself. In life, 8 or 9 out of 10 people end up being unlucky. The remaining ones, though, are actually even more unlucky. However, both Vivian and Lily were starting to believe what each other had to say. Well, maybe not completely, but at least they had promised not to continue fighting. As long as the other party did not let the cat out of the bag, they would at least maintain a neutral stance. This was the result of intense persuasion from Hao Ren, which comprised of an hour long of facts, reasoning as well as appealing to one's sense of justice. Hao Ren took up all the courage he had as the owner of the property and forced the two to patiently hear what each other had to say. Additionally, he tried to prove that what he said was the truth. Lily gave evidence that she did not threaten Hao Ren by calling Raleigh out as a witness. She also showed Vivian that there were no trails of blood on her hands, thus, Hao Ren was not cursed. Seeing that Lily was a bit silly, Vivian decided to trust her. To prove that she was able to curb her blood-sucking tendencies, Vivian asked Hao Ren to take out a piece of blood tofu made from duck's blood. To be honest, Hao Ren felt that the way Vivian proved herself was not very convincing at all. Yet astonishingly, Lily believed Vivian after witnessing her display. Would you have believed something a silly person chose to believe? In that temporary moment of peace, Hao Ren finally had the opportunity to ask what Vivian's intention was for coming by in the morning. It was obvious that Vivian was shocked when she first saw him, so it did not seem like she was looking for someone in the first place. Vivian nodded and fished out a piece of colorful paper from her bag. Well, I followed the address written on this paper. I'm looking for a room to rent. Sitting beside her, Lily was staring at the damaged tea table with a penitent look on her face. She immediately transformed into her werewolf form and her ears were upright, aware of her surroundings. A sense of foreboding flooded her. Hao Ren was also stunned. Taking the piece of paper from Vivian, he realized it was cut out of a newspaper. It was the ad he posted up a couple of days ago. He had not been putting up the ad for the last 6 months, but once he did, business came knocking on his door. However, why were all his potential tenants abnormal? This is the correct address. Hao Ren had a weird expression on his face. He had no idea what went wrong in his life. He looked at Vivian from head to toe and surveyed her. You came here to rent a room? Yup. Vivian answered whilst continuously nodding her head. Hao Ren asked impetuously, of all places, why did you come to my place? Hao Ren actually meant why bizarre and abnormal things kept happening to him, but Vivian misunderstood his point. She answered innocently, It's because your place is cheap and I have no money. I found out I could only afford the rent here after searching everywhere. I really don't want to live in the deserted outskirts or cemeteries like I had in the past. Hao Ren had his mouth open, shocked at hearing about the vampire's lifestyle. Aren't vampires supposed to be dark lords of the night? Why is this vampire in front of me so different? Yes, the rent here is definitely cheap. If you don't mind the location being secluded, you can stay here, Hao Ren nodded and answered. Unable to cry or laugh, living under the same roof with a vampire would make no difference as he already had a werewolf living there. He could not foresee the days ahead being average or normal. He let it be and allowed the vampire to stay. At least his life would be full of surprises. However, I have to say something up front. Both of you must stay out of trouble. Of course, I will not tell anyone about your true identities. I'm more afraid of you killing the eyewitnesses. Committing murder, however, was the least of Hao Ren's worries. Both ladies in front of him were significantly different from what he had learned from stories. Ignoring the fact that they were the odd ones among their own race, the girls looked quite harmless. As Hao Ren and Vivian were about to reach an agreement, Lily suddenly slammed the desk and stood up saying, "Wait. This winged rat will also be living here. Under the same roof." The slowness of her reactions had no bounds. Bang. Unable to withstand the pressure anymore, the cracked tea table finally gave way and collapsed onto the floor. "You think I'm willing to live under the same roof with a beast?" Vivian retaliated. She was also hot-tempered. However, remembering her promise to agree to a truce, she did not emanate any cold air. "If I wasn't broke, I would have never come here." Hao Ren suddenly felt that rejecting Vivian might have been the right thing to do. He was definitely looking for trouble letting these two stay in the same house. It did not seem like they would be able to proceed with the truce with such tempers. Also, Hao Ren was not that desperate for income from the rent. However, he had already agreed to it and changing his mind then would be inappropriate. He could only try comforting a sulking Lily. "It's going to be all right. Vivian does not look like a bad person. And I've already agreed. Let her stay here for the time being." "Arg. No. I am the owner of this house, this is my home. Why am I even discussing this with you?" Hao Ren finally remembered that it was his territory. When did those two girls become the owner? He was starting to get confused due to the tension between the two ladies as well as the string of events that happened earlier. Lily smiled bashfully. This was all different from the legends. The curious and easygoing werewolf shrugged and bobbed her head. "The decision is yours to make. But I still dislike this winged beast." "That's more like it." Hao Ren nodded, hugging himself. He was planning in his mind how he was going to let his two abnormal tenants live under the same roof in harmony. Living in harmony was out of the question, preventing them from bringing the house down was more like it. He was already dreading a life full of chaos. If it was possible, he would have liked to have the two of them out of his house. However, there were two problems. Firstly, although both girls seemed to be easygoing, it was not a smart move to offend them. Asking them to leave without any valid reason could have caused problems and Hao Ren was not ready to risk it. Also, he knew that he was no match for either one of the two girls with superhuman powers. If his words failed him, he would have been completely lost and it would have been hard for him to back down. Due to these two reasons, he concluded that it was impossible for a normal human being to bargain with two beasts. No matter how complicated things were, Hao Ren was determined. With his meager strength, he tried to think of a way to protect his somewhat normal life, which was about to end. While he was in deep thought, there was a loud cry beside him. "Oh, my purse." Vivian jumped up from the sofa, the elegance she carried majority of the time completely vanished. She had lost her purse. "It must have happened last night when I was knocked out by this bastard. I have no idea where my purse is." Vivian rummaged through her bag. Finally, she glared at Lily and said, "You dumb mutt. That was all the living expenses I had left. Pay me back." Although slightly embarrassed, Lily turned away. "Do not put the blame on others for your own mistakes. It's good that you can't afford rent now. I won't have to look at that dumb face of yours." Moments later, however, she turned her head towards Vivian. "Maybe try having a look at the front door and the streets nearby. Perhaps you dropped it on the road." This proved that the silly werewolf was in fact kind. I flew a vast distance last night, in search for a place with bright moonlight to recover, Vivian sobbed. How would I know where I dropped it, my remaining living expenses? I've been saving for a long time. I've already lost my money 4 times this month, and that was the last of it. Hao Ren's eyebrow twitched. How could this vampire be so unlucky? What's happened to this so-called Dark Lord of the Night? Nevertheless, it did not take long for Hao Ren to realize that it was actually a good thing. He did not need to worry about epic battles happening between the werewolf and the vampire in the future. He had a good and valid reason for Vivian to leave. Maintaining peace was the way to go. The previous plan was quite good, but in the end, Hao Ren still could not find it in him to just chase Vivian away. As mentioned before, he was a good guy. He never meddled in matters he could not help with. However, if he was able to help, he would not turn people away. If he had chased Vivian away, what would have happened to her? The vampire girl appeared to have lived a tough life. She would have either had to stay overnight on the streets or go to the wild or the graveyard like she said, without any food, water, home and job. If she had gone to a train station, she would have alerted the police and be facing forced adoption or worse, forced deportation. It was quite pitiful. Looking at the pretty girl trapped in such a situation, any normal person would not have been able to see her suffer. Even though Hao Ren felt that a vampire had capabilities and would likely not face such dilemmas, he could not be sure. As the vampire he met was not a conventional one. If one was to refer to all the novels and movies available, there would be no reference of a vampire being that naive. She was poor, different, and so fond of human beings. In spite of that, he did not ask Vivian to stay without paying. There had to be a limit to his generosity, and he was not a saint. He also had to take into account Lily's feelings as she paid her rental as usual. He could only allow Vivian to owe him the rental. He decided to wait until she found her purse, though very unlikely. Another option was for her to find a job and earn money, which was more likely. Only then would he ask her to pay him back. Could this really work? Vivian was not convinced that she had any good luck. She stared at Hao Ren unbelievably. It might take me a really long time to pay you back. My financial luck has not been any good. Hao Ren raised his eyebrows and observed the vampire girl's facial expression as he listened to her defeated speech. How bad had her life been? You don't have to overthink it. Just stay here. Hao Ren waved his hand. He noticed Lily's discontented expression and said, "The decision has been made. This is my home. I can at least make a call on the rental." He then turned to Vivian. "An empty room is available upstairs. Let me show you the room." "But, where is your luggage?" He should have asked the question earlier. When Lily moved from the other city, she brought over huge boxes of belongings. He wondered if the vampire girl was so poor that she only had a set of clothing with her. "Oh, it's outside." Vivian remembered her luggage and rushed outdoors. She then brought in her old rugged luggage case. Fortunately, her lack of luck with money did not affect her belongings. Although the huge case was left outdoors for so long, it was not lost. When Hao Ren noticed Vivian's luggage, he could not help but sigh. He vaguely remembered his late father, who used to carry a case of similar style for work. It was then passed down by his grandfather. He swore that he would never watch movies about vampires in his lifetime anymore. Right when he decided to go upstairs to help Vivian tidy her room, he heard a strange sound nearby. Lily embarrassingly caressed her stomach, stood up and said, "Landlord, shall we have some food?" Hao Ren turned to the clock in the living room and the hands pointed to 10 in the morning. There was so much hassle that morning, he almost forgot about breakfast. The only one at home with a full stomach was Raleigh. Damn. Our lives are worse than a cat's these days. He mocked himself, and Vivian exclaimed in surprise, "Do you offer breakfast? Do I need to pay extra?" The vampire girl was delighted, but Hao Ren really wanted to tell her that truthfully they did not cook for tenants. Though they were on special terms, he saw her look of contentment and did not want to disappoint her. He thought the vampire had been through a pretty pitiful life. Breakfast was already delayed, so they might as well had lunch. Hao Ren decided to make his best dish, noodles. Lily was an omnivorous werewolf who was not picky, and Vivian was already so poor, so he was quite sure that she would not care about the food that much. A simple meal would do. When he went into the kitchen, he turned around and asked the vampire girl a question. "Vivian, do you eat normal human dishes? I heard vampires can only drink blood and can't digest normal food." He felt a cold breeze around his neck right after he said that. "I belong to the Blood Clan. I'm not some low-level vampire," Vivian corrected the statement, but she embarrassingly covered her face. "Other Blood Clan members can only digest blood, but I can eat normal food. It can't be helped because nowadays, whether it's human or animal, they are all infected with all sorts of strange diseases. If I drink unclean blood, I might suffer from stomachache for a few days. I have to check if the subject has a health certificate before I drink its blood. But sometimes, even the health certificate can be falsified. I can't bear that risk, so I haven't been drinking blood for quite some years." Hao Ren was speechless. When he was about to enter the kitchen, the cell phone on his sofa rang. Lily rushed over and peeped. She handed the old Nokia phone over to Hao Ren and said, "Landlord." "The phone. The call's coming from a strange set of numbers." Hao Ren walked over to pick up the call. He wondered what kind of phone number could be strange. He was stunned when he saw the set of numbers on his phone screen, 000000012345. Is there anyone in the world using such a number? The monotonous sound of the ringing phone kept urging him to answer. The screen displayed the creepy set of numbers clearly, and Hao Ren could not help but pinch his face to make sure he was not imagining things. He was not sure if it was an illusion. The ringing seemed to grow louder as if it came from every direction. He felt heat emanating from the phone and the ringing becoming faster and faster. The sixth sense he had developed since he was young was activated. His intuition told him that the call would be extraordinary. As though he was possessed, he pressed the button to pick up the call and placed the phone to his ear. "Hello." A sweet voice was heard through the phone. "Hello. Hello. Is this Hao Ren?" Yes, this is." Hao Ren tried to recall if he ever disclosed his mobile number or met a woman with such a voice. However, he could not. "Who are you?" "You don't have to worry about that," the stranger claimed. Judging from the background sounds, the call seemed to be made from a rather noisy place. Some odd whistling could vaguely be heard. It could have been some construction site. "I am at an import and export company. A few days ago, you sent out your resume. You were looking for a job, right? I would like to inform you that an interview will take place this afternoon." An import and export company. Hao Ren was stunned. He then remembered his decision to look for a job and the time he sent out his resume. He was just trying his luck as he did not have any working experience and was not a professional graduate from any reputable school. He faced obstacles looking for jobs on site and did have high hopes for the resume he sent out. He did not expect to be invited for an interview. It sounded like a good company. It was some sort of import and export company. He thought that he just got lucky. However, he looked at the two new tenants in his living room. He initially thought that he would not be able to rent out the apartment when he was first looking for a job. At that time, he lacked cash flow from the rental, but since then, he had already obtained tenants. The tenants were not reliable though. One was a dumb werewolf while the other was a poor, starved and naive vampire. He would be surprised if both of them could pay their rental on time, so he figured that he should not fully rely on his rental business. The woman started to sound impatient over the phone. "Hey, are you still listening? I am telling you to come over in the afternoon for an interview." Hao Ren reconsidered and he nodded. "Sure, I'll be there in the afternoon." The stranger gave him an address which was not too far from his place. Then she hung up. Hao Ren was taken aback again when he looked at the phone screen. It showed, calling time, 0 minutes 0 seconds. When he opened the log, there was nothing. It was like the number 000000012345 had never appeared. Hao Ren put the phone down. His expression was just as blank as his mind. In the past, he would have considered a phone call from an unknown number as another misdial, brushed the whole thing off and continued on with his day. Yet at that moment he was in a very delicate situation. Staring cautiously at his two uninvited guests secretly getting at each other whilst waiting for food in the living room, it dawned on him that his normal life was long gone. What used to be grandmother's stories and urban legends could be true. What used to be myths and imaginations could be true. What was previously thought to exist only in movies could very well be true. Hao Ren was already on edge, so much so that he would jump at Raleigh the cat's incessant purr, perceiving it as some sort of ill omen. The thought of that strange phone call he received just a moment ago sent chills down his spine, and most importantly, it just occurred to him that he had never submitted his resume to import and export trading companies. True, he had sent out tons of resumes to all kinds companies for all sorts of positions, including one for a male host and another for a pet psychiatrist, whatever that means. Hao Ren was all too aware of his academic background and miscellaneous skills. He was the kind of oddball who had to use a calculator even when purchasing a celery. How would he have the gall to try out for a trading company? Was he just selling himself short? As far as he was concerned, trading companies were more or less similar to the Hutong mini-market, at least that was how he sees it. Landlord. Landlord, sir, what's gotten into you? He could hear Lily's tone of concern right next to him, and it was then that his soul snapped back to reality. He nodded at the two strange creatures. Oh, a human resource unit scheduled an interview with me in the afternoon. Oh, don't you worry, landlord. I'll take care of the house for you. Lily raised her claws up high and shook it in excitement, as though she was met with an opportune moment. That's what I do best. I guarantee you won't lose a thing. A dog could do better. Vivian would never let go of an opportunity to drop a sarcastic comment, and each one so far had been a direct hit. But Hao Ren couldn't help but think, talk about the pot calling the kettle black. You're homeless and penniless, and you're still keeping up with that attitude. Have you no shame in your bloodline? Lily glared at Vivian, and later decided to shake it off. Her stomach was growling again, and this was the ground for the quick dispersion of her anger along with the gradual weakening of her fighting spirit. She motioned to Hao Ren as she helplessly laid on the table, "Landlord, please can you make us something to eat? After that I'll definitely help you guard the house." Hao Ren was taken aback by how casual these two were with him. Did he just find himself two tenants, or were they actually two of his many ancestors? He had been a landlord for many years, and yet this was the first time his tenants responded in the way long-lost friends would. Still, very swiftly, Hao Ren managed a smile, attributing all of the above to mere cultural differences between species and or subspecies. If anything, he was definitely no match for these two outsiders. So, for the sake of his future livelihood, it would be wisest to maintain, if not improve, his two female guests' appreciation for him. At least then, if ever Lily and Vivian get on each other's nerves again, he could confidently bark at them, the way a master would to his pets. It took some effort for him to satisfy the two girls' hunger, during which he made sure Vivian was really feeding on normal human food, and only then he finally felt relieved. After everything was done, it was already 11. Obviously, he could do away with lunch, and what's left would be providing the vampire and werewolf with allowances to last until nightfall. Having considered that Vivian was unlucky enough to not have a penny to her name, and that Lily would certainly not offer up her share, canines are especially protective of their food, he had deliberately stocked up on biscuits for Vivian, leaving the latter so moved that tears were rolling in the corners of her eyes. Due to the vampire's habit, Vivian slept through most of the day. Not long after her meal, she went upstairs to wash up and prepared to rest. Lily, on the other hand, was extremely energetic when the sun's out. She would be standing guard on the ground floor. The two of them managed to stay away from each other due to the differences in their lifestyle, and Hao Ren for the time being didn't have to worry that they would bring the house down when he wasn't around. He could go in peace to the venue the mysterious woman arranged. That's right, despite all the suspicions, Hao Ren eventually decided to go have a look. There's no point running away from the inescapable. If somehow that woman was related to these strange creatures he had come across recently, then he had to get to the bottom of it. Vivian's and Lily's fighting abilities were evident. This was not the territory for the average Joe. He wasn't even sure if he could make this work. Of course, he contemplated taking Lily along. All things considered, she could come in handy. Eventually, he digressed. First off, they had only known each other for 2 days, and as far as he could tell, the werewolf girl seemed quite innocent. Or rather, naive would be a word more accurate, but that still wasn't ground to take advantage of her. So, to simply use her as a shield on his adventures based on what little trust they had would most probably be regrettable. That one time she had to stay home to guard against the vampire was an entirely different matter. Secondly, Hao Ren himself was 7 feet tall to say the least. For a man of his height and stature to go out with a female bodyguard just for an interview, what would people say? How could he live with himself? So, he decided to check out the place on his own. While waiting at the bus stop, he couldn't stop thinking about Vivian's and Lily's abnormalities, and kept muttering to himself whether leaving them at home was a good idea. Honestly, his career as a landlord, if it could be considered a career at all, had been going on for several years, and he had seen just about every kind of tenants. Even strays and gangsters and those with questionable backgrounds had lived under his roof. The most crucial skill a landlord would need was the ability to differentiate the good tenants from the bad ones, whether they be dangerous criminals or mere thieves and conmen. Examples of landlords being robbed blind were more than he could count. Hao Ren wasn't worried that his two guests belonged in the latter group, because he knew these two girls with these mind-boggling skills were 100 times more dangerous than the common crooks. Was it a mistake to leave them at home just like that? Would he come home to a wreckage? Would he find a SWAT team armed with 200 explosives and grenades? Would vehicles and representatives from the Scientific Institute seal off the roads in Nanshao? Would he see two American men in black suits and sunglasses flashing neutralizers at him? All these unrealistic flights of fantasies haunted him as he got on the bus and began his journey from this remote place in Nanshao to another not far away. The address given by the mysterious lady on the phone was a place Hao Ren had heard of but never been to. It was really far, beyond the city's radiation range, a village right outside the outskirt of the city. There wasn't any public transportation in the city that could reach that place, and even from the most desolate region of Nanshao, only one lousy bus was available at the moment. Such a place was queer indeed. Even its name was just as strange. Who would have figured it was called Bastard Barrio? Hao Ren sat wobbling in the lousy bus for a good half an hour. He could feel the wind in his face as though the walls weren't there. From what he could tell, it might only take a slightly wider ditch to take apart the bus for good. Along the journey, the number of passengers on board never exceeded 3. He even suspected whether the driver, looking somewhat cynical, was trying to match the annoying bus ride, but in the end he was delivered to his destination in one piece, in the middle of a barren land, no different than the ones he saw along the way. The bus clunked off with a 4-of-4 beat of rickety clanging sound, which was pretty much mirroring Hao Ren's thoughts and feelings at that moment, surging endlessly as he rolled his eyes upwards and sighed deeply. He was definitely tricked. The woman on the phone didn't even need a script, did she? Once he got off the main road, all he had to do was follow the narrow trail and Bastard Barrio would be within walking distance. He could clearly see the village as he stood on the mound next to the road. It was primitive, with few residents and even fewer mud houses, and more than half of the mud houses were just a disaster away from crumbling. The village in the whole was built with poor architecture, with a landscape dating back to several decades ago. The largest building was a little brick tower at the center, the size of which was comparable to Hao Ren's house. The woman on the phone had invited him here in the name of a trading company. Hao Ren stood on a mound of earth by the side of the road, looking down at the near-deserted village. He began to doubt his intellect and whether or not it was beyond saving. How could anyone be so easily fooled to come here, of all places? He had been living in the city for more than 20 years, so naturally he was astounded to find that a rundown place like this existed just beyond the outskirt of the city. A place so primitive and desolate. True, it was certainly pretty far away from the city, but in Hao Ren's opinion such a place should be found hidden in the ravines deep in the mountains, the kind of place disconnected from civilization, with steep cliffs and dangerous slopes blocking off every means of transportation. Only then would it be possible to find a community in such a poor state, but that village is not even close to fulfilling these criteria. There was even a highway within reach. That's why the state of the village left him dumbfounded. What was more surprising was that, as he recalled, the woman on the phone invited him here in the name of an import and export trading company. This was where made his stand. You could insult one's personality, but it was a step too far to insult one's intellect. Although he still couldn't differentiate between trading companies and supermarkets, at least he could tell that finding even a grocery store in that village would be an impossible feat. Under the blazing sun, Hao Ren remained by the road, staring at the direction in which the rusty old bus had previously disappeared. If he kept waiting here, it would take another hour for the next bus to come. This thought alone almost made him give up on life. It was then he even began to miss the good-for-nothing, lazy bum, freeloader of a vampire for a guest at home. He missed Vivian and the frigid coldness around her. Technically there was always the scent of blood in the air, but at least it's chilly. Where he was then, not a single sprout could be seen in a radius of a few hundred meters, and the largest shade within his range of sight was a telephone pole 100 meters away, the shade of which could barely shelter his shoulders from the heat. He could not stay here much longer. As for the village, which seemed to be a fair 10 minutes walk away, there was no way he would go there, not even if the interview turned out to be a genuine invitation. Who in their right mind would come here just for a job? No matter how he looked at it, it was obviously a joke. The woman on the phone had played a cruel joke on him. Right then he was just curious about one thing. Why did he still come here after he answered the call? When he heard Bastard Barrio on the phone, why didn't he sense anything strange? Why was it only after he alighted the bus did he felt like an idiot? These were the three questions he did not thought about prior to making the trip, and now that it registered in his mind, he felt like an total idiot. That's right. He remembered the moment he got that strange call. He certainly did deliberated for quite a while, hesitated a moment, and decided to come and take a look only after much careful consideration, during which he felt that everything was normal. Those few minutes of contemplation were indeed proof that he came here willfully, but looking back, this whole deal was nothing but irrational. Moreover, he should have raised an eyebrow when the words, Bastard Barrio, and Import and Export Trading Company, were used in conjunction. Subconsciously, Hao Ren reached to rub his head, as if making sure that this thing perching on his neck still belonged to him. A few seconds later, Hao Ren shuffled towards the direction from which he came. Of course he knew it was unrealistic to walk all the way back home, given such horrid weather, but he felt he had to at least keep a little distance between himself and this ghost town to be safe. He could wait for the bus as he walked along the road. Since that rusty bucket of a bus didn't have fixed stops anyway, he could pull it over wherever he was. It was a strange phone call, a strange contact number, and a strangely mysterious woman. She managed to persuade him to come over with an obviously flawed invitation, so Hao Ren reckoned that sometime in the past his brain had gone ballistic. He had to leave this place as fast as he could, and return to his home, to his two strange life forms. Maybe Vivian or Lily could help him, at least from what he knew, the vampire practiced some magic. She mentioned it before. He had barely walked a few steps when the phone in his pocket suddenly rang as though suddenly coming to life. Hao Ren was so startled that he almost peed himself. The familiar ringtone was 10 times clearer than it had ever been, blaring so loudly that his eardrums almost pop, as though his rage and frustration was being channeled through the phone. Hao Ren frantically reached for the device, and right there across the screen was the freaky number he had been dreading all this while, 00000012345. He just stared at it, and instinctively removed the batteries. Luckily for him he didn't buy an iPhone. iPhone users, under such regrettably unusual circumstances, would have to resolve to smashing their phones to bits by now. And very quickly he realized he would just have to do exactly that. The ringing didn't stop even after he took out the batteries. It was like a scene straight out of a horror film. His phone did not go silent even without the batteries. The row of numbers on the screen together with the eerie ringtone persistently demanded his attention. If previously Hao Ren was not sure how he felt about creepy occurrences, he definitely was more than certain at the moment that he was being targeted by the paranormal. To make things worse, he did not have anything with him that could be used in defense. He didn't even have the chance to ask Lily and Vivian how the paranormal world was like before carelessly walking out into the unknown. When the ringtone bleated for the third time, Hao Ren made up his mind. He held his phone, raised it in the air, and forcefully smashed it on the ground with as much force as he could muster. I don't think he could utter another sound. Oh, God, no. Nokia surely lived up to its name. Hao Ren helplessly stared, eyes wide, as he thrust his old trusty phone on the ground. It brushed against the surface, and rolled itself in the mud, beeping in victory. Hao Ren admitted that he had never had much strength in him, but whatever just happened in front of him could only have of one explanation. The caller on the other side was telling him that attempts of escape were futile, and that there are some things that would just defy any reason, logic, and common sense. It would be just as useless to strap the phone on a missile and blast it off to the other side of the world. With trembling hands, he slowly reached down to grab his apparently undamaged phone and brought it to his ear. His heart was thumping like mad, but still he steadied himself, for he was a man of pride, one who valued dignity over death, before saying, "Hey. What's the big deal?" "What else?" "The interview," said the sweet but shrewd female voice from the other end. Not knowing exactly why, upon hearing it, Hao Ren breathed a sigh of relief. Could it be that she was speaking like a normal human, therefore he felt somewhat safer? Or was it because the mysterious woman was still talking about the interview despite the things that had happened, which led him to feel somehow consoled? He had gotten so far, and with all the strange occurrences before this, if the other person really meant him harm, then this was the perfect moment to strike him. Since the woman did not use her supernatural abilities and shoot him to the afterlife with a bolt of lightning, Hao Ren concluded that he should be safe for now. As for why a lightning bolt amongst all other things, that was where Hao Ren couldn't go any further with his limited imagination. He couldn't think of anything else that belonged to a higher power. The duel between Lily and Vivian the night before seemed like a Hollywood blockbuster movie to him. Interview. Hao Ren calmed himself, pretending that he was not in the slightest bit afraid. Even his tone was convincingly steady. Let's not beat around the bush. I'm already here, so are you still going with that whatever trading company cover story? Can't you just lay it out in the open? Oh, our superiors have orders, we don't reveal it if it's neither the right time nor the right person. The woman on the other side didn't seem so creepy and gloomy. He did not sense any evil intentions from her, as it turns out to be a seemingly normal conversation. Hao Ren got really curious about it. Now, if you would just follow my directions, you would reach the workplace of our unit. Hold it. Hao Ren bellowed, interrupting her. He was not going to play follow the leader any longer. I want to be clear about this. What do you really want? A person of honesty keeps no secrets. Just stop using the interview as a guise, okay? The woman on the phone got impatient. Why do you have to ask so many questions? I've said it's an interview, so it's an interview. If you really want to know our rules, you have to come here first. Now listen, see that telephone pole up ahead? Get over there, place your hand on the ad about some ancient Chinese medicine, and face north. Don't know which way that is. Up is north, down is south, left is west, right is east. So, raise your head and look up. Hao Ren was speechless. He thought he was speaking to a lunatic. When he did turn to face the sky, he was flabbergasted. A large towering building was hanging upside down right above his head. The moment Hao Ren looked up, his jaw dropped. He saw a vision in the sky. If only he could see the look on his face, he would surely feel so retarded. A huge building was seemingly floating in the sky, upside down. It was a huge mansion with the shape of a cross, with long annexes on both sides, white walls and blue roof tiles. It was a fusion of a neo-European castle and a manor, exuding a style of elegance and simplicity. Behind the mansion was a streamlined towering structure of complex designs which was in complete contradiction with the style of the main building. Overall, the entire building complex gave him a sense of wonder and seemed to be shrouded in mystery. There were green meadows all around the blossoming garden, with rows of small fountains on both sides of the gardens and a massive fountain at the open area in front of the mansion. The floating inverted mansion was defying the Newton's law of universal gravitation. Hao Ren had never seen a mansion as big as this one, much less one with the wrong side up. What if the whole thing fell out of the sky? He trembled slightly at the thought. Despite of the massive mansion in the sky, strangely, there was no shadow on the ground. He could still feel the sun beating down on him. He was sweating profusely, but not because of the heat from the sun. Everything was beyond his comprehension. While he was in a daze, his phone rang. Hello, Hao Ren. Did you see the big mansion in the sky? Hao Ren held his phone near to his ear, sighing after a long pause. Oh fuck. Employee rule no. 1. Never cuss before your superior does. But since you're not officially one of us yet, you can get away with it. The woman on the other end sounded casual. Now, get your hands off the bill and keep your eyes on the square, you don't want to get flung around. Hao Ren was in cold sweat upon hearing what she just said. His legs felt as wobbly as jelly. He held on to the telephone pole as if his life depended on it. He couldn't run away. All he could do was wait for whatever that might come. Before he knew it, he felt as if he had been flung a few hundred meters up into the air. He didn't know where he was, he felt zero gravity and was spatially disorientated. He was spun several times more in all directions, almost throwing up before things started to calm down. He then was surprised to find himself still standing on solid ground, but not where he was a moment earlier. There was a huge fountain before him. He could feel the pleasantly cool mist from the fountain as a breeze blew the droplets on his face. On both sides of the fountain were gardens of grassy meadows and flowers. He was standing on a pavement of white stones. He wasn't sure if it was made of stone, but from the fine texture of the surface he could tell it wasn't concrete. It was some sort of fusion between plastic and metal which he had never seen before. Slowly, Hao Ren turned around and he saw the big white mansion. At that moment, the eventual realization befell him. He realized he had just landed on the inverted estate he was marveling at a while ago. Hao Ren was thrilled. He looked up expecting to see the place where he originally stood, but it wasn't there. Instead, it was a clear blue sky with a beautiful aurora dancing behind the few white clouds. He didn't see the sun, but he could feel a warm light shining across the sky from the horizon. There was nothing surrounding the mansion, only a road going through the garden straight into a seemingly impenetrable fog. There was fog everywhere. It seemed that the only existence there were the white mansion and him. It felt like an island in the middle of nowhere. He was terrified, feeling abandoned. Just then, he heard a squeak behind him. He quickly turned around and saw that the mansion's door was opened. Someone emerged but was shrouded in fog, emanating a soft warm glow. But that someone was actually something Hao Ren had never seen before. He wasn't sure if it was in fact a human at all. He could neither tell if it was male nor female, as he could barely see the face of the creature. It had the figure of a human, but the skeleton was formed of plasma. He noticed that someone wasn't actually wearing any clothes. He had so many strange encounters lately, so much so that what's strange didn't felt as strange anymore. He kept his composure and maintained a calm facade as the blue foggy figure nodded and gestured him to enter. Hao Ren plucked up the courage and followed it from behind. He found that the interior of the mansion was just as grand and elegant as the exterior. Behind the entrance was a magnificently lit lobby, after which there was a long hallway paved with red carpet. Hao Ren carefully observed every inch of the hallway as they walked through it. There wasn't a single light source in the hallway, and yet it was as bright as day. There were murals on the walls on both sides. Some depicted castles and towers which towered into the clouds, some were artworks of planetary objects and space, while some displayed battleships and tech-advanced armies in battlefields. Still some depicted sorcerers. Everything was so random, without a central theme and story. As he reached the end of the hallway, he saw a piece of mural which was the most dumbfounding of all, a childish graffiti of little assholes. He was then led to a dark brown heavy wooden door. The blue foggy figure pointed to the door before vanishing into thin air. Hao Ren shrugged and held his breath before knocking on the door. He heard a very pleasant female voice behind the door. It was the woman who had talked to him on the phone earlier. "Come in. The door's not locked." Hao Ren had to push with all he'd got to open the heavy door. Inside was a semicircle room with a heavy, dark-colored desk in the center of it. The floor wasn't layered with carpet as the hallway was, but was finished with a welcoming, warm-colored tiles instead. On the curved wall was a semicircle rack stuffed with strange playthings. Some looked like models, some were fine crystals which gleamed in the light, and also there was a half-eaten fruity pancake left in the cubicle. Only God knew why would a fruity pancake be there in the first place. A woman with long silver hair was sitting behind the desk. She looked very young, probably even younger than Hao Ren. She was gorgeous. Her brown eyes, silver long hair, prominent nose, and thin lips made her look unapproachable and cold at times. Of course that might be a biased perception of Hao Ren. After all, she was a doomsday demon to him. Her attire, too, was strange. She wore a black gown which looked like a modified wind coat, but it suited her perfectly. It accentuated the air of mystery about her. While Hao Ren was still fascinated by her appearance, the woman smiled. Her smile had helped break the ice somewhat as she made a friendly nod and gestured Hao Ren to be seated next to her. "You can call me Raven 12345. I'm your superior." Hao Ren wasn't really listening as he was still lost in utmost admiration and asked knee-jerkingly, "What is this place?" "Here. Space Administration," she proclaimed proudly. "Bastard Barrio Office, Node EN35 of the Space Administration. Isn't that cool?" Hao Ren. He stared dumbstruck, eyes wide opened. This seemed to happen quite a lot lately, upon hearing a statement that would make anybody choke on hearing it. At that moment, he could barely believe what that big-eyed chief just said. "What was that you said?" "Space Administration," the silver-haired lady smirked as she repeated. She had a frosty demeanor about her when she was silent, but as she opened up to speak, while pulling a smirk off, all the icy coldness melted away and she actually seemed quite amiable. Hao Ren asked impetuously, "No, not that. I mean, the latter part. Oh, the bastard barrio branch office, the silver-haired lady happily nodded her head, delighted to acknowledge that fact. Hao Ren really wanted to slam his head against something, anything, but he figured he should do it outside. Everything on display here seemed so posh and pricey that if broken he probably wouldn't be able to pay for the compensation, but surely he definitely wanted to bang his head on something. How could Space Administration and Bastard Barrio Branch Office, two terms which were already out of this world, be placed in the same sentence? And judging by the way this white-haired lady phrased it, she didn't seem, in the slightest way, disturbed by that peculiarity. Her expression was as though this was how it had always been. Hao Ren's bewilderment upon hearing those words were comparable to that upon hearing these. Old Man Wang has 3 sons. The eldest is called Deming, the second is called Ming, the third is called Eisenbielik William Hannaba. But what the silver-haired lady spoke of somehow made sense that Hao Ren was left with no rebuttal. This really was a bastardly barrio. With his face hardened, Hao Ren snickered and slightly readjusted his body on the cotton seat to a more stable position. He was worried that if he hears any more gobsmacking statements, he would fall off onto the ground. Space Administration, you say? Oh, and what was that you called yourself just now? He just recalled that the person to whom he was talking had also introduced herself a moment ago, but he didn't catch her name as he was busy calming his nerves. The silver-haired lady didn't seem to be bothered. She was far more good-tempered than he had expected. I am Raven 12345. You have to remember that. It's important. Including the numbers. Including the numbers. Actually, the numbers are the important ones, said the woman who called herself Raven 12345 as she firmly nodded. To prevent confusion with other ravens. Any more questions? Immediately Hao Ren's mind was filled with fantastical settings of man-made humans, clones, dark forces, evil armies, and the likes, plotting world domination, along with a 200,000-word script and a web of love-hate relationships and romantic feuds among dozens of characters, not implying that he had a wild imaginative mind, but rather confirming that he had watched tons of movies. He was clever to not ask about the whereabouts of the other ravens. Experience tells him that this is a taboo, and in later days he would come to find out how explicably wrong he was, so he rubbed his chin and said, Raven 12345. Quite a creative name, hee. So, what do you want from me? The silver-haired lady smiled. You took in a strange creature into your home, am I right? If calculations are correct, it was a werewolf. Hearing that, Hao Ren became nervous. Every muscle on his body couldn't help but twitched. All along, he thought he had managed to keep Lily's identity a secret. It was the only way for him to be able to keep his familiar everyday life. Who would have known that the lady before him had discovered everything? Quickly he calmed himself down as he knew this lady was another strange being. It wasn't in his control that she knew some things. It was clear how little he knew about a certain mystical realm, so he shouldn't act too surprised, as doing so would only put him at a disadvantage. Raven 12345 did not mention Vivian, which to him meant her intel was a little incomplete, and so naturally he should not actively pursue that. True, he nodded, but surely this is not against any taboo, right? Your Space Administration, is it in charge of stuff like this too? No, it's not a taboo. I just want to remind you that from now onwards you'll play host to many more strange creatures. This is going to be your job. Raven 12345 glossed over that startling statement she just made. The organization graciously wishes you. Hold up. Hao Ren couldn't bear it anymore and blurted out, this was your arrangement. Of course not, but after today it is. Raven 12345 shrugged. You had gotten in touch with that werewolf called Lily anyway, and it just so happens that I require a helper. You're quite suitable for the job. What kind of business is it that you guys are running here? Hao Ren frowned. He felt that Raven 12345 was quite incoherent with her words, always muttering the strangest things at the strangest moments as she kept beating around the bush. You should just come clean and explain what the hell it is that the Space Administration really does. You guys. You mean we? Well, we are quite a large group. Raven 12345 touched her nose. The Empire of Xiling spans a vast territory, ruling over countless universes, owning numerous departments. Division of labor. Complicated. You could generally refer to us as gods. This would make it easier to explain. By the way, I should tell you that it is only recently that we made the overall transition to become gods. The organization is still young, but youth brings with it opportunities. As for the Space Administration, it's a department under the Empire tasked to manage each and every universe, take charge of communications, direct and control the flow of crossovers between universes, increase worldwide cohesion, all that good stuff. At least that's what was stated in the Superior's most recent documents anyway. We'll see if there will be any changes. I am in the Junior Committee of the Space Administration, and here I take charge of all affairs in this universe, like preventing particular races from committing world annihilation, or planning the evolution of the celestial bodies, things of that sort. Technically this isn't my job, but due to special circumstances, I'm taking over for now. As for you, you're here because I need a helper. I have to manage everything on the surface of this universe, and some areas require an agent, so I leave those to you. Don't you feel lucky? Hao Ren's head was spinning as he listened to that elaborate tale. However, he managed to calmly stand up and said, "Thank you for your hospitality, my dear host. You're a good person, and your program was really interesting. May I ask where the exit is?" Raven 12345's face showed no signs of surprise, as though she had faced this same situation millions of times before. She waited for Hao Ren to finish and then casually lifted a finger. According to the job entry requirements, new interns are required to sit for some psychological tests for quite a long period of time, so now we'll take you through the basics. Before Hao Ren could utter a word, his body felt intensely light, and his surroundings abruptly changed. The extravagant building that he was in was no more. Surrounded by thick darkness, he realized he was standing in the midst of nothingness, and within it was a spot of light which suddenly sparked and beamed and brightened up the whole area. What emerged first was an indescribable ball of heat, its structure unrecognizable, and its form unstable. This ball of light bore down on him as it got charged up, and instantly expanded into the endless distance beyond. Hao Ren could barely blink while this ball of light swelled up to a size he could no longer comprehend. And as the light faded, its extraordinarily high levels of energy quickly dissipated, downsized. Primitive particles were created as the space cooled. The aftermath of that first boom of light kicked-start the universe and everything in it, the creation. The earliest primitive nebula was born, and it would go on to be the prototype for other galaxy clusters and giant celestial bodies to come. As the dust began to settle and cool down, ancient planets began to rise from the thick maelstrom of the primitive nebulae, while those primitive nebulae split themselves and each became an independent cluster of galaxies. Partial core reaction replaced the explosive energy of the Big Bang, and the world welcomed a milder era of order. Following the constant cooling, primitive stars swiftly ran out of fuel as they continued to burn. With one explosion after another they projected heavy elements long accumulated within them. These heavy elements were the first highly stable material to appear after the first ray of light. They followed the path constructed by the remnants of those stars and flew, clashed and fused with one another, and soon took the form of newly born, young stars. And so, the first stellar system was created. As materials began to thin out, the restless galaxies slowly stabilized after emitting tremendous amount of energy and consuming immeasurable amount of material. The complexity of the universe began to increase, clumps of stars evolved, and life multiplied. Hao Ren felt that his sights were now far beyond human interpretation. He was observing the universe from an all-knowing point of view, and very quickly he found the target he had been restlessly searching for, right there, close to a young star, a blue planet, covered with greenery. And then everything came to a halt, paused, and a line of words floated before his eyes: professional documentation of Genesis, trial version. If you wish to continue, please recharge. The surrounding scenes faded away as receding tides. Hao Ren realized he was still sitting on the couch in the middle of the classy room, his clothes drenched in his own sweat. Raven 12345 smiled at him and said, "This is the recordings of the evolution of your universe from the beginning of time. Of course, some sections were tweaked to adjust the timeline for the convenience of your viewing. This was not recorded by me, the snapshots were taken directly from the information in the depths of the universe. So, in short, it's like you have personally experienced Genesis yourself. How does it feel?" Hao Ren sat on the chair, as still as a feather, hands firmly placed on his knees, and a serious look hanging on his face. He realized he had just gotten himself into a situation that far exceeded any logic, and if he had any desire to enjoy what's left of his life, the wisest choice would be to contain his floppy behavior and usual childish antics and listen attentively to what the lady, who claimed to be a goddess, had to say. So how does it feels to personally experience Genesis? Smirked Raven 12345. Hao Ren observed her expressions and confirmed that this woman was indeed capable of working something out. Only then did he manage to grin. If I was to ask you whether this is an illusion, will you conveniently sentence me to death? No, of course not. A lot of people have asked me this. I'm not surprised at all. Raven 12345 shrugged. I can show you anything and everything, whatever it takes for you to understand and believe all I have told you, but now's not the time. For now, you'll just have to take me for my words, and we'll talk about work. Hao Ren raised his hand, gesturing her to slow down, for he needed some time to go through what just happened. He thought what he had just experienced was a rather weird occurrence on Earth, but this woman before him actually mentioned that she came from another universe. Not Earth, not an alien planet, not an alien galaxy, but an entirely different universe. She claimed that she came from an empire in charge of ruling many universes, and that she worked at a unit called Space Administration, specifically managing the order of this universe, and now this self-proclaimed goddess said she needed an agent to help with some trivial affairs on selected areas on Earth, and so she set her eyes on none other than him, Hao Ren. In a nutshell, that was how things went down since he met them. Linguistically the instructions were clear, only that this whole offer challenged all three of his fundamental views, the view of the world, the view of life, and the view of morality. Hao Ren stole a peek at Raven 12345, who was aware of it but did not indicate anything. Seizing this opportunity, Hao Ren compared the silver-haired lady with the images of gods and goddesses and other immortal beings, imagining a pair of wings extending from behind her back or a halo floating magically above her head, but after much struggle he gave up. He knew it was just a waste of time. From the moment he got to know the illurophobic werewolf, he should have discarded all myths and legends he knew. Are there really other universes? Hao Ren stammered. I've read about them in books, parallel universes and life, but isn't that just a theory? It's much more complicated than that. The real structure of the world is much more complicated than what humans imagined. Raven 12345 curled her lips, as though lazy to explain. For the moment you won't have access to the other worlds. That would be after your formal evaluation or after special duties. All that you have to focus on now is dealing with your designated areas. Why me? Hao Ren couldn't help but interrupt. He felt he had to assert himself slightly in this conversation. Even if he couldn't claim victory in this battle, he should try to speak with a little more confidence. You haven't sought my agreement, have you? Oh, that reminds me. Raven 12345 gave herself a facepalm, which prompted Hao Ren's first drop of cold sweat. The principle of voluntary work, there is such a thing. I have been assuming that you have consented. Does this mean you don't? Hao Ren was stunned. He never expected such loose conditions. Her communicative ability did not match up to his initial impression of her godly power. He thought he would meet his doom if he refused the offer. But it was after Raven 12345 stated the conditions that he began to contemplate. What should he do? Should he really refuse? But it would be such a pity, as his new strange life would come to an end even before it begun. What will happen if I don't agree? You'll be rid of your memories of these past couple of days, and I'll relieve you of the werewolf. Don't worry, no harm will come to either of you, just that you'll no longer have anything to do with these issues anymore. Common folks have common lives. For an ordinary fellow to handle extraordinary business, history tells that they usually meet with dreadful ends, Raven 12345 explained unemotionally. I'll look for other agents. After all, there are so many people on Earth, and if worst comes to worst I can always apply for an intern to help me. Hao Ren felt a pull at his heartstrings and was consumed by an unexplainable feeling. Then he shook his head. And what if I agreed? What do you want me to do? I'll say first that I won't be doing anything against my morals. I'm a good person. Raven 12345 smiled again at that. Don't be so nervous, you're working for God. In other dimensions this position is called the Holy One, or the Messenger. It's just that we work under a different system, so we don't call it that. What are you worried about? We're not asking you to do anything evil. Your job consists only of two main tasks. The first is to receive guests, like you have always been doing so far. The difference is that these guests are quite special, and they'll need assistance, a place to stay, someone to guide them. You have to take care of them, so that they won't go out and cause destruction to mankind. The second is to help me with other work. Hao Ren was speechless. He honestly suspected that the second task far outweighed the first one. When you say guests, do you mean the ones like Lily? Hao Ren wanted to know more, although he might not get it his way, but at least he wouldn't be exploited. Strange creatures. May I ask, why are you doing this? Just so that they won't disrupt mankind. Actually, the reasons are quite complicated. Raven 12345 was very patient. Any civilization, unless faced with imminent catastrophe or other disastrous ordeals that require gods to intervene, has the right to proceed and grow naturally, undisturbed. I know the myths and legends of the human world, but the real gods are not quite the same with the ones in those stories. We create the world, we manage the world, and we can destroy the world, but all of the above are governed by strict rules and regulations. No one can simply disturb and destroy worlds. Before we switched professions and became gods, we had made quite a few mistakes, so this is now a serious problem. Your world is the same, it should evolve naturally without the intervention of external forces. It's expected that your kind will face challenges along the way, but if a third power wields the potential to twist the process of evolution, it becomes our responsibility to stop it. As for your job, it is to clean up the aftermath. Hao Ren went to great lengths to make sense of what Raven 12345 just said, and thought he had grasped the gist of it. You said there's, what? A third party with the power to disrupt our progress. Lily, and those I have to receive in the future, are all related to this. Don't overthink it. That's ancient history now. The largest threat to humanity was resolved by me. You humans are safe now. As long as they don't ask for death, they'll live a full life. Raven 12345 looked into Hao Ren's eyes. As for the guests you'll be receiving, it's true that they're connected to one of the bigger cases, but it's still considered confidential information to you, so it's best not to ask. How is it, do you accept this job? Although it's just to clean up some mess left behind by the Space Administration, it is considered to be the career of a lifetime in a lot of worlds. More or less, it's considered a privilege for temporary workers in the entrepreneurial sectors. Well, putting it that way makes me more reluctant to agree. All right. Hao Ren responded. Raven 12345 scoffed, not even one bit bothered. Hao Ren looked down, seriously contemplating this offer which could change his entire course of life. He still didn't dare to believe everything this woman just said, and could not understand what was the deal with this talk of the universes, gods, worlds, and the rest. It's just like what Raven 12345 said. For now he could only trust that everything is as she said, and start considering what he should do next. If he nodded his head now, he would be straying onto a path completely different from his past. In Raven 12345's words, it meant he would be working for God. Regardless of whether what she said was true or false, no matter if it was a trap or not, and not knowing whether his future will be bright or bleak, he would be facing an entirely new and extraordinary life. His fate would change, for the better or worse. If he shook his head now, he would lose nothing but his memories of the past 2 days, forgetting matters an ordinary person shouldn't know in the first place, and then return to his honest and simple life as a little landlord, or find a real job just like everyone else, or a wife maybe, who may not be a perfect match but works out just fine in the end, and maybe live together for the remainder of their lives. There really was nothing to choose from. Hao Ren had a dream. He hoped of becoming a warrior. Having superhuman powers, he would travel the world, upholding justice and protecting all 4 corners of the world without fearing. Hao Chang. He would be loved by all the people and become a hero in due time. Oh, that was when Hao Ren was 9, it was ages ago. Also, his perception of the 4 corners of the world then was limited to the radius of Nanjiao Elementary School and a couple of streets nearby. Also, Hao Chang was his class teacher. In the past couple of years, similar to most of the people then, Hao Ren's noble ambitions had dwindled to things more realistic, having a higher than average salary, getting married to above than average woman, having 1 or 2 children that are better than the average kids, buying a decent house, which is not much of a worry as he already had one. Those were the things he thought would make up his life, up till this moment. The turning point of his life was inching closer. Hao Ren could literally feel as if an entirely different future was laid out right in front of him. Looking to the self-proclaimed, but seemingly queer goddess in front of his eyes, he nodded. All right, I promise. There was not a shade of surprise on Raven 12345's face. It seemed that she had gotten quite used to this kind of situation. Also, she already knew what Hao Ren's answer would be before he even said it, and she just nodded her head. Yes. From now on you will be on probation as a junior examiner in the Space Administration. The welfare that you'll be receiving will be similar to part-time trainees outside the administration. Hao Ren replied. Please don't go into the details. I've had a hard time picking up the courage to do this. Raven 12345 seemed to smile upon seeing the worried and lost Hao Ren. Don't worry. We're not evil, we maintain universal peace. Don't you think it's a very noble job? If I were to look for an assistant in another galaxy, I would have people queuing up the mountains and sea. It's just that planet Earth is at such a state of godlessness, that's why I did not get myself involved all this while. And since I had to look for an assistant now, I can only keep a low profile while doing it. So don't be embarrassed of your job because of this. Hao Ren muttered. Why do I feel that you do not sound like a god? Gods behave this way. Sigh. It's not just you, even I myself am not used to this title, answered Raven 12345 with a carefree tone which surprised Hao Ren as she swung her hands. We've only changed our title in these recent years, we were not called gods prior to this. You prefer, you can address us as Shi Ling disciples. That was our clan name, and being God is actually our job. Shi Ling disciples? Hao Ren asked as he tried to take in this new bizarre term. It still does not sound right. What should I normally address you? Royal Goddess. Hao Ren was lost for words. If this woman was a self-proclaimed god, he should address her as a royal goddess, but that did not seem right at all. From their conversation so far, Raven 12345 reminded him of an elderly sister, having a casual chat with him in the supermarket. So this was how goddesses supposed to be like. Well, I'm not saying that you have to have a halo behind you, but at least do not fiddle your fingers whilst talking. Raven 12345 took no notice of this matter and continued fiddling away with her fingers whilst nodding her head at Hao Ren. Well, I'm not used to this title. Just call me by my name, or call me 12345. That is worse, that is not a human name at all. Hao Ren was speechless. After that, Raven 12345 went into the details of Hao Ren's future career. There was actually not much to it, it was just about how he should continue to welcome bizarre guests into his home. Since he already had a werewolf and a vampire in his house, Hao Ren thought to himself that a few extra abnormal creatures would not be a problem, well, as long as the new guests were as easygoing as the current two. Don't worry, Raven 12345 reassured Hao Ren while thumping on her chest. We're quite concerned about our workers' welfare, so we will not endanger you in any way. The ones sent to you would have already passed some tests. This is your current mission, and for now, leave the other matters to those concerned. About some other situations that you may face, we'll only discuss those when you've come to face them. Are there any more questions? Reluctantly, Hao Ren finally blurted out what was troubling him the most. Then. What about Lily? You did not arrange that. No. As I've already mentioned, only the new guests coming from today onwards are arranged by the administration. The werewolf. Take it as your fate since she was the one who found you. Also, you seem to be getting used to this pretty well, that's why I chose you. Normal people cannot accept this, hence I was looking for someone who can cope with these challenges and bizarre events to be my assistant. I just have to take good care of the welfare of these guests, right? So, where do we draw the line on taking good care of their welfare? Worship them like my ancestors. That's unnecessary. All you have to do is to prevent them from causing trouble. The main goal for all missions are to let human civilization develop and grow the way it's supposed to. Humans do not need to come in contact with things that have a different direction to their civilization's development. These things can cause humans to have misconceptions regarding their own cosmic laws. As humans have short lifespan, misconceptions in 1 or 2 generations can lead to the destruction of the development and civilization attained for the past hundreds of years, and of course this will also greatly affect the future. Judging by your expression, I guess you're already confused with all these things. I'll just briefly explain the rest. As Raven 12345 was talking to Hao Ren, she took a stack of papers out from the drawer. In a nutshell, you're a junior employee as well as a temporary one. You do not need to know about the complicated things, and even if you do know about them, you would not be able to handle them. When the time comes, I'll tell you more. Please do not worry, I have no bad intentions. Let's sign the contract. Hao Ren felt that the other party was still hiding a lot of things from him. However, He had no choice as Raven 1 2 3 4 5 seemed to be a woman of discipline although she was easygoing. She would not reveal something that she's not supposed to. Also, Hao Ren knew that there was no need to rush things. It is better to be more careful when he was still unclear about the situation. Hao Ren sensed that he was being tricked but he did not have the courage to escape. He was sure he was no match for any of the creatures in this place, the fog-like creature included. He was shocked looking at the contract in front of him. The words can be easily understood, but the contents did not make sense. Appointment letter for trainee examiner, Space Administration of Xiling Kingdom, was the title followed by the subheading, Xiling Celestial Family Alliance Agreement, and another subheading, Related Documents for Temporary Employees Working at the Civil Division, below it. In addition, a line of tiny words were written below, 106th edition, re-edition, revised edition, final edition, the absolutely won't be revised edition. Apparently, even the Queen herself will not be able to revise this contract easily. It was handwritten by the kingdom's head of state himself. Each department was very careful with their work. The main body of the contract was written below. The job scope and attendance system can be easily understood. It was also stated that the newly joined employee's rank was similar to that of the bishops, hallowed scions, and agents. It was noted that this was in accordance to the degree of civilization of the employee's workplace and this was to ease the new employee to orientate oneself into one's community. What was written after that shocked Hao Ren. The highest order of the Xiling celestial family clearly stated that, the newly appointed examiner in charge of those wanting to convert, in other civilizations they are referred to as prophets, the first chosen one to have an epiphany, shall enjoy a worker's welfare which includes, receiving staples during festivities and gifts during spring festival as well as monthly reimbursements. According to where one is at, the welfare given shall be arranged by the local god responsible. Upon seeing the contract, Hao Ren's eyes were filled with tears. He found the contract somewhat familiar, very much familiar in fact. How's it? The welfare offered is quite good, right? Raven 1 2 3 4 5 asked. I know you weren't interested in the welfare just now. After my many encounters with all kinds of life forms, most of them would feel weird reading this contract as they felt that they should be volunteering when it comes to working for God. However, the administration doesn't work this way. A few experienced bosses came up with this contract, saying that humans are more used to this contract. Sign it if you do not have any other suggestions. Hao Ren could only remain speechless. He decided to not believe in TV programs and novels anymore for the rest of his life. Walking back to his home, Hao Ren was holding a stack of poor-quality prints, his emotions welling inside him. His face was covered in tears. From that moment forth, he was a civilized, trans-universal employee. He was a human who could communicate with celestial beings directly. He was someone from the Space Administration. Hearing about this titan in his background would definitely cause a commotion. In his possession was a contract with God himself and his employee identification number can be found on the Heavens attendance sheet. If he lived in a world where God was paramount, he would be able to proudly proclaim that he was a candidate for sainthood, as long as he passed the tests for his internship. He would be promoted from a contracted saint to a permanent one. Who would not be overwhelmed with emotions and covered in tears after finding out about all these? Why are these godly things and issues so different from the ones seen on TV and novels? No matter the circumstances, Hao Ren was appointed to a position in an extraordinary place. Disregarding how weird Raven 1 2 3 4 5 is, the Space Administration as well as the whole Xiling Kingdom definitely exceeded Hao Ren's knowledge and imagination by far. Looking at the contract in his hands, Raven 12,345's words flashed in his mind. Henceforth, you shall be a trainee examiner. Your one and only mission is to take good care of your house guests. The Xiling celestial family is not used to employing religious means to manage its affiliated organizations as other religions do. Thus, employees will be graded by their attendance as well as performance. It's best if you do not blindly follow the religious lore and booklets found on Earth say. I've seen this type of silly children in other worlds. Anyway, do not worry about it that much and just perform well. Letting out a sigh, Hao Ren had a feeling once again that he had been hoodwinked. He folded the stack of paper and planned to lock it in a secure location at home so as to prevent Raleigh from eating it. In fact, Hao Ren could not believe what he had just been through. He had his doubts on Raven 1 2 3 4 5, especially when she held that stack of paper in her hands. Have you ever seen God's contract printed on paper? Also, there were spelling errors on it. However, Hao Ren was aware of his current situation. No matter who Raven 1 2 3 4 5 was, her abilities greatly differed from his. Based on her spelling errors, her habit of playing with her fingers, her fondness for Chinese pancakes as well as her gibberish speech, ordinary human beings would just be unable to handle her quirks. Thus, in order to guarantee a peaceful life, Hao Ren had no choice but to play along. Walking under the scorching sun, Hao Ren checked the time on his phone. He was at a deserted road and there was no one to be found. He thought to himself, working for God is not a reliable job after all. Even transportation can still be an issue. Even though I'm a prophet in the Celestial Society, I still have to take the bus after the inauguration. Also, I've been waiting for such a long time for the bus. He could not help but think of earthly myths and legends. He was trying very hard to recall how saints and prophets go back to their homes after they had a revelation. Did they enter a crowded carriage to return home? However, after giving much thought into this, Hao Ren still had no idea which holy book would actually take note of this. While his thoughts were jumbled, he heard a ring. Looking at his phone, he realized he did not recognize the number. Thank God. It's not 000000012345. Hello, who are you looking for? Asked Hao Ren politely as he picked up the call. From that moment he was someone with an identity. It was time for him to be cautious of his speech and actions. Although the goddess above him was not a reliable one, he was determined to showcase himself as a dependable person. Lily's voice could be heard and she was speaking in a worried tone. Landlord. It's me. I'm Lily. Sill. Lily. Hao Ren managed to stop himself from saying, silly werewolf. What's wrong? Oh, I have just recalled that your number is on the newspaper ad. I was searching for the place yesterday and I should have just called you. Sweat was rolling off Hao Ren's head. You called me just for this. Lily's immediately became excited. Oh, no. Something's not right with Vivian. She flew out from the window in broad daylight. I've tried chasing after her but I lost her. Hao Ren wanted to roar at Lily, stating that this was supposed to be the main point for her call. Why did she talk about so much irrelevant rubbish in the first place? Vivian flew away. She transformed into a bat and flew. Hao Ren did not know why he was still curious with the details even during times like this. It was probably because he was a bit confused at that time. A few minutes ago, a self-proclaimed god was just reassuring him that the creatures staying in his home will not cause any trouble. Well, he was just out moments ago and now something's happening back home. She transformed into a huge bat before flying away. Lily corrected Hao Ren in a serious manner before continuing. Before flying away, she mentioned that this place was not safe. I do not know who to look for and that's why I called you. Stay right where you are at home and do not go anywhere. I'll be back shortly, Hao Ren answered hurriedly as he caught sight of an old and battered bus from the corner of his eyes. Whilst trying to flag down the bus, he was reassuring Lily. After he slammed his phone down, he squeezed inside the crowded bus and thought to himself. What's wrong with Vivian? Although Hao Ren's knowledge on mutants were limited and the only things he knew about them stemmed from unreliable sources such as the television and novels, it was already proven that these sources were in fact unreliable. He was at least certain that vampires were not comfortable out in daylight. In addition to that, Vivian had confirmed this fact personally. Thus, he was certain that a vampire transforming into a colony of bats to fly away was primarily due to an emergency and not because she just happened to wake up and decided to go out for a stroll. And what did Vivian mean when she said that this place is not safe? Was she referring to his house? Hao Ren knew that apart from the vampire, the silly werewolf was the other powerful being at home. Vivian looked down upon Lily, so the scene of the vampire being chased away by the werewolf's bad breath was certainly impossible. So, why was his house unsafe? Suddenly, Hao Ren felt that the mission that Raven 1 2 3 4 5 handed to him was in fact a trap. It was half an hour later when Hao Ren arrived at the old city of the southern suburbs. A few people clothed in work attire was walking towards him when he exited the bus. His heart stopped, thinking to himself, we've been exposed so quickly. Who are these people? Scientists from the Science Academy? Are they setting up traps for the vampire? Was any surveillance system installed? Maybe they're special forces disguised as telecommunication workers. He was relieved once they got nearer to him. They were indeed repairmen. Hao Ren could barely make out their conversation when they briskly walked past him. "This is a first in my career. How did that piece of brick manage to get up there?" "I have no idea. I can only say it's not done by a human. Who has that kind of arm strength to throw a brick up this high on top of the TV station? But this is so bizarre, that piece of brick snapped 3 steel rods. Yes, this is so bizarre. I was just wondering what the problem was when I got a call about people not getting any TV signals in southern suburbs. Witnessing half a brick smashed into the broadcasting tower, I wonder what are we going to write in our work report now." As the repairmen slowly disappeared from Hao Ren's sight, Hao Ren was clear of 2 matters. First, he finally obtained the reason as to why there was no TV signal in his house. And of course, now he knew where the brick Lily flung at Vivian during the fight the previous night ended up at. What's the point of knowing this? Hao Ren carefully went up to his front door. After making sure there were no traces of special forces or mysterious men in black suits hiding nearby, he took out his key. However, before he could insert the key into the keyhole, the door opened. Vivian was standing in front of him, smiling. "Landlord, you're home." After catching his breath, as a matter of fact, it took him a while, Hao Ren looked at this vampire who apparently flew away, and with uncertainty, asked, "Vivian, didn't you not fly away?" "Yes. Something was up and I went out. But I'm back now," said Vivian as she chuckled. Hao Ren could only remain speechless. I can't imagine what the future holds. Hao Ren did not know what to feel when he was invited into his own home by Vivian. Sitting on the sofa in the middle of the living room, 2 unusual creatures stood before him like children who did something wrong. Vivian looked embarrassed whereas Lily was both embarrassed and awkward. "I'm sorry, landlord. I was quite surprised when this winged fellow came back out all of a sudden. And that's why I forgot to give you a call," said Lily sheepishly. Raleigh was rubbing against Hao Ren's leg. He was the most at ease among them, oblivious to the events that had happened hours ago. All he knew was to rub against his owner's legs while he purred wholeheartedly. Hao Ren waved his hands and the 2 girls with superhuman powers sat before him. He could not help but feel proud. "Although my life is generally a mess, my brain is mostly confused and my future is uncertain, both the legendary werewolf and vampire still show respect towards me. Ain't this a sight?" Although he took a little pride in it, he knew that Lily and Vivian were just being polite plus, both were also feeling a bit apologetic. It was just that both of their identities blew Hao Ren's mind. "Why did you fly away all of a sudden?" Hao Ren thought of his newly acquired job, feeling that it was his responsibility to be aware of the 2 girls' whereabouts. In the case of any event, it would then be easier for him to report to Raven 12345. Hao Ren was completely aware of his limits as a normal human being. He knew that he would not be able to control a werewolf and a vampire by himself in the long run. As he was looking for a solution, a self-proclaimed goddess announced, "Gods shall be responsible for world peace." Hao Ren of course had to take the opportunity to let this goddess be his patron. He knew that Vivian may not trust a newly acquainted human she just got to know a few days ago. Thus, he continued, "Please don't mind me. I'm just curious and no matter what, I'm still the landlord. Also, you're different. At least I have to know where you've gone to when I can't find you, right? It's okay if you don't want to tell me." "Well, it's actually nothing." Lily bit her lip, looking determined to tell Hao Ren. "It was just a misunderstanding. I thought some obnoxious fellows were tailing me and I wanted to deal with them somewhere further away. Then I realized I was just being oversensitive." "Obnoxious fellow?" Hao Ren glanced at Lily. "Some other werewolf." He could guess what Vivian meant by the place not being safe. It seemed that the vampire had other foes, enemies that held grudges against her from way back in time. "Not werewolves," Vivian answered as she threw Lily a dirty look. "We've been battling against werewolves for thousands of years and they've never had the advantage. Yes, they are a headache but they are still not considered a serious threat. Stick to your own story. Don't involve me in this." Lily let out a threatening growl from the back of her throat as she licked her nails. "If you're looking for a fight, let's have another 300 rounds somewhere with plenty of bricks. Can you please stop mentioning that brick-throwing skill of yours? Please reserve some dignity for the werewolves." Hao Ren shouted. Not paying any attention to Lily, Vivian explained with a straight face, it's the demon hunters. Some call them exorcists. A blockbuster came to Hao Ren's mind. Getting excited, he asked, you mean people like Van Helsing? Stop fooling around. That's a movie. Vivian was not in the mood for jokes. She looked deeply troubled. I'm talking about real demon hunters, fellows who are half human. They are monsters in the eyes of humans and us, mutants. The battle between us and the demon hunters is never ending. We have never been able to completely vanquish the opponent. They worked on their own during earlier times, but now, they work through many different religious organizations as well as normal humans. And this is a problem. Hao Ren automatically felt the few sheets of paper in his pocket. A thought then came to his mind. Didn't Raven 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and the Xiling Empire give him the task to take care of the mutants staying in his home? On the other hand, it sounded like these demon hunters wanted to protect the human race. It was so horrifying thinking about what was behind all of this and how they were connected. Landlord. What are you thinking about, landlord? Lily's voice shook Hao Ren out of his thoughts. So, these demon hunters are that powerful. Should we be terrified? Hao Ren was determined to understand the situation the next time he saw Raven 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because he realized that he was treading on shallow waters, very shallow waters in fact. Looking at Lily's curious expression, he asked, so, you have no idea about these demon hunters? I have no clue, answered Lily as she was playing with her hair. I've never met one in person but I've seen them in movies. Vivian snorted. I've no idea how she was raised. We've talked briefly and she does not even have a clue about common facts. She has no idea what demon hunters are, what the different classes of the Blood Clan are, and more surprising, she doesn't have a clue about the different werewolf classes. She does not know about the history between humans and mutants. She's like a blank piece of canvas. It's pure luck that she managed to survive this long. Lily glared at Vivian furiously, but she did not mutter a word, proving what Vivian said was indeed correct. It's true that I don't know about these things, but you can't blame me for it, Lily muttered. Since I was born, I've been living with humans. I've grown up with humans and what I know about werewolves have been from the humans. I've never met another mutant in person apart from myself. I've also been looking for other mutants since young but to no avail. I thought I was the only werewolf left. As a matter of fact, all I found were mutant-related clues. Meeting this winged fellow is considered my first encounter. Both Hao Ren and Vivian could only stare at Lily. A while later, the vampire muttered to herself, such a pitiful person. I'll try my best not to make fun of you. Hao Ren looked at Lily curiously and asked, so you've never met other mutants before? Then you should have nothing against Vivian. Why did both of you get into a fight right after you just met? Well, the TV always shows werewolves and vampires as mortal enemies. I had to make my kind proud. Lily answered boldly. Hao Ren and Vivian were speechless. Now I am extremely regretful that I took her seriously. Vivian could no longer hide her thoughts. I've seen a lot of brainless werewolves, but it's a first for me to meet one like you. He, Lily just had a peculiar life experience. Let's not dwell on this subject, Hao Ren answered, trying to ease the situation. He was also getting worried about the demon hunters mentioned by Vivian. So, you found traces of demon hunters this evening. Was it just a false alarm? Yes, I've been dealing with them for many years, at least a few hundred years I would say. So I instinctively know about their presence when the demon hunters are nearby, said Lily with her eyes closed. I thought that I had caught their scent nearby in the evening. But when I caught up I found nothing, not even a trace. Hence, I'm sure it was a mistake. I've made a similar mistake before. It's just instincts, it can go wrong sometimes. Looking at Hao Ren's expression upon hearing the above, she gave him an understanding nod. Don't worry, if there are indeed demon hunters around. I'll take this silly werewolf along and leave. We will not give you any trouble. Although demon hunters proclaim that they protect the human race, there are still some extremists and sometimes innocent ones get involved. Although it's uncommon in this 100+ years, you can't change that rabid canine nature of theirs. Lily's ears immediately stood at attention. That rabid canine you mentioned. It's none of your business, answered Vivian while glaring at the werewolf. You're so sensitive to irrelevant stuff. All Hao Ren wanted to say was, "It's easy for Vivian to say all that." If they had really left, it would have been likely that the demon hunters seemed to have an immense pressure on Vivian. Although she tried to appear calm, even someone who was as slow as Hao Ren could see that she was actually deeply troubled. Vivian's offer to leave if demon hunters showed up in the city to protect the innocent touched Hao Ren. Although legends portrayed vampires as both cunning and cold-blooded, Vivian seemed to be different. Hao Ren did not know about other vampires, but at least, the one he knew was not bad. Of course, being touched was one thing, but facing the consequences was another. He could not allow Vivian to leave just like that. He even had a 3-page contract with a goddess in his pocket. How would he explain to Raven 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 if the two unusual creatures were to really leave his house? Don't stress about it and just stay here. There's no need to worry. Even if the demon hunters are around, I'll find a way. Where do you get this confidence from? Vivian looked at Hao Ren, curious about the reason why this person who was scared of trouble just this morning suddenly had a sense of accountability. If you're saying all this just to comfort me, I don't need it. Just don't think too highly of those demon hunters, as they're not fully humans. They are not very considerate when it comes to fights. Well, something was up this afternoon, and I think both of you can't just leave as you please. After some consideration, Hao Ren concluded that there was nothing to hide. Fishing out the contract from his pocket, he showed and explained the afternoon's events with Raven 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to the two magical creatures in front of him. Lily was confused as usual, thus useless, whereas Vivian read through Hao Ren's entire contract seriously. She was in deep thought as she listened to Hao Ren recall his experience, and she was aghast. "Everything you said is true." Hao Ren shrugged. "Of course it's true. I have nothing to gain from lying to you. I've heard of this multiverse concept from you humans," Vivian said while waving the sheets of paper in her hand. "I can't help but say that this science things of yours is quite interesting. So, this means that you met advanced beings who claim to be rulers of the multiverse. They have a specialized organization that manages each and every universe called Space Administration. Then, there's a self-proclaimed goddess called Raven 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and she found you to ask you to be her assistant. To sum everything up, you're now..." Vivian looked at the contract, reading it word by word, "an agent of Bastard Barrio at EN35 in the Space Administration of the Xiling Empire, a part-time staff outside the administration awaiting confirmation." Cold sweat broke out on Hao Ren's forehead. This coming out from someone else's mouth sounded more impressive than reading it by himself. "Landlord, I know that you're under a lot of pressure right now," said Vivian in a grave and earnest tone after some deliberation. "I'm dead serious," Hao Ren answered with a bitter smile on his face. "I've had to use several hours to take all of this in, imagine you. But no matter what the overall condition of the Space Administration is, Raven 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is not someone we can easily mess with. I'll let you meet her if you don't believe me. This shouldn't be breaking the rules and regulations." Vivian knew that Hao Ren was serious and not fooling around from his expression. She frowned and thought carefully. "I've never heard about this organization before, and I've lived for... I've lost count. But I've never heard about a space administration since the Bronze Age. However, I've heard a lot about gods, but most of it was just humans using it to frighten other humans. Also, the Raven 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that you mentioned does not sound like a goddess to me. This is weird. Where did they come from?" Hao Ren nodded his head. "I've asked her about this. Raven 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 said she did not take notice of the things on Earth as humans were developing at an alright pace on their own. She even had no clue about atheism and would just hire an assistant to take care of minor matters on Earth. That's why humans don't know about the Celestials. She often uses the word Celestials to represent the gods, and I find this a weird thing. Try not to think about this first. So in a nutshell, this Raven 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is the one who asked you to take care of the mutants staying here, right?" Vivian asked as she handed the papers back to Hao Ren. "This shows that she's not an ally of the demon hunters, and it's good news to me. It would be best if she could help when the demon hunters show up." Hao Ren shook his head. "I think this is quite unlikely. According to her, the Empire rarely interfere with the workings on Earth. They will not interfere unless us humans decide to destroy all of our descendants. However, I'm sure that she'll contact me in the future. Let's ask her only when the time comes." I was in a rush this evening and I did not have the chance to ask a lot of questions. Hao Ren let out a hollow laugh and mocked himself. Well, you know me. My brain is a mess like glue. It's okay, Vivian answered and pointed to a dazed Lily. That mind of hers is confused every day and she's still here with us. You have to try to be optimistic to live a better life. Upon hearing this, Lily growled and jumped onto the table. Try repeating what you said again. Ignoring the werewolf, Vivian seemed to have her mind set on something and nodded towards Hao Ren. We need to find a way to see Raven 1 2 3 4 5, the way she showed up seems dodgy and it looks as if she understands the relationship between mutants and humans well. I need to ask her about this. Then, Vivian was a bit embarrassed. Actually, it's hard for us to live in this world as the demon hunters are getting increasingly active and humans are getting harder to deal with. From the top of the food chain, we've now dwindled to the bottom. We don't even pass down our history to the next generation and moreover, we're divided amongst our own kind. This is also why many things we know about ourselves are found in records written by humans. Take this werewolf for example, throughout her life she's never met her kind and all she knows about werewolves were told by humans. I do not want to be as ignorant as her. Hao Ren knew that Vivian wanted to know more about her own kind by asking Raven 1 2 3 4 5, he sensed that the chances of Vivian succeeding were low knowing Raven 12,345's ability of beating around the bush and keeping her lips sealed. However, Hao Ren did not say a word. In that moment, Lily finally began to snap out of her daydream. The first thing that came through her mind was, "Oh landlord, what are we having for dinner?" Hao Ren could only remain speechless. He was suddenly jealous of the crude, simple as well as ridiculously innocent thoughts of this canine. After throwing a scornful look at Lily, Vivian stood up with a smile of her face. Let me prepare dinner since I do not have to pay for it. I'll be responsible for the cooking and cleaning until I get a job to pay my debts off. Is this arrangement okay? Hao Ren waved his hands in order to show his generosity. There's no need for this. You're being too kind. I should uphold my pride as a member of the Blood Clan. I can't stay and eat here for free without doing anything in return. Vivian answered seriously. Being straightforward, Lily joined the conversation. You're already broke, please stop being so proud of yourself. So by pride of the Blood Clan, you mean become someone's maid in exchange for food? Hao Ren immediately grabbed a piece of biscuit and stuffed it into Lily's hand to distract her, stopping her from continuing. What a silly and stubborn werewolf. She says whatever that comes up at the top of her head. She shouldn't have said that even if she wanted to pour salt on someone's wounds. Hao Ren couldn't help but be proud of himself as he saw a vampire preparing dinner for him in the kitchen and a werewolf guarding his house in the living room. Ever since Raleigh came into his life, Hao Ren was the one doing the chores and it's been a while that he felt so relaxed. Brushing off his worries, Hao Ren made himself a pot of tea and read the newspaper while he enjoyed the air conditioning. He imagined himself as someone who was all-powerful, eating. On the other hand, Lily was hitting the TV. Canines really knew how to make themselves at home, as she happily shouted, "Landlord. There's TV signal now." Hao Ren's heart sank as he recalled the brick half that went through the TV station. He realized that he was actually just a high-class nanny, a nanny with very low fighting abilities. Hao Ren's life would take another turn once Vivian served dinner.